Chapter 1. The Dying Message. The marketplace of Nexus 9 buzzed with the cacophony of 1,000 alien species bartering, arguing, and exchanging goods from across the galaxy. Holographic advertisements shimmered in the recycled air, casting multicolored glows across the metal walkways and vendor stalls. In this melting pot of interstellar commerce, Joe Quest moved with practiced nonchalance, his weathered leather jacket and scuffed boots marking him as human, a rarity in this sector. Joe's features were sharp, but handsome beneath a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, his eyes a penetrating blue that had charmed information from countless sources across the stars. Those eyes now focused intently on the slumped figure before him, cradled in his arms as the crowd parted around them. Dr. Elena Moss, once the galaxy's preeminent archaeologist, now gasped for what would be her final breaths. Blood, crimson, so unmistakably human, seeped through her fingers where she clutched her abdomen. "Joe," she wheezed, her once brilliant mind struggling to form coherent thoughts as her life ebbed away. "They found me, but I didn't tell them." "Save your strength," Joe urged, already knowing it was too late. "Who did this to you?" Instead of answering, Dr. Moss reached up with trembling fingers and pressed a small neural key against Joe's temple. The device adhered to his skin with a soft click, transferring its contents directly into his neural implant. "Find the Ascendancy, before they do," she whispered, her eyes growing distant. "Everything depends on it." With those words, Dr. Elena Moss, the woman who had mentored Joe and introduced him to the wonders of humanity's lost treasures, breathed her last. Joe closed her eyes gently, a rare moment of reverence in his otherwise irreverent existence. The moment of silence was short-lived. Joe's enhanced senses detected movement at the marketplace's eastern entrance, 3 hulking figures whose reptilian scales caught the light. Krell hunters, the most relentless bounty trackers in the sector. Their elongated snouts lifted, sampling the air, before turning in unison toward Joe. "Damn it," Joe muttered, easing Dr. Moss's body to the ground. They must have followed her, knowing she would lead them to him. Now they had 2 reasons to hunt him down. Joe reached into his jacket pocket and palmed a small device. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it skittering across the marketplace floor where it came to rest beneath a row of security sensors. 3 seconds later, every alarm in the eastern quadrant began blaring at once. Merchant stalls locked down automatically, security shutters slammed into place, and panicked shoppers scattered in all directions. In the chaos, Joe slipped into a maintenance access tunnel, moving with the confidence of someone who had studied the station's schematics in advance, which, of course, he had. Always have an exit strategy. That was rule number 1 in the treasure hunting business. The tunnels were cramped and dimly lit, designed for service droids rather than humans. Joe navigated them swiftly, ignoring the occasional shower of sparks from poorly maintained electrical junctions. Behind him, he could hear the heavy footfalls of the Krell hunters, their muscular bodies struggling to fit through the narrow passages. 8 minutes of navigating the labyrinthine maintenance system brought Joe to docking bay 17, where his ship waited. The Cavalier was not the most impressive vessel in the galaxy, its hull plates mismatched from hasty repairs, its once white paint job now a patchwork of scorch marks and rust. But what it lacked in aesthetics, it made up for in modifications that didn't appear on any registry. "Sophie, prep for emergency departure," Joe called out as he approached. The ship's external sensors recognized his voice pattern, and the entry ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss. "Departure protocols initiated," responded the ship's AI in a crisp, slightly sardonic female voice. "Though I should note that our docking fees remain unpaid. Again." "Bill me," Joe quipped as he bounded up the ramp. "We've got company." Before he could reach the cockpit, however, a blue-gray figure emerged from the ship's engine room, all 4 arms crossed in evident annoyance. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, his skin the color of a stormy ocean, with gill-like respiratory slits that flared with each agitated breath. "Quest," the alien barked, his voice a harmonious resonance typical of ceruleans. "You promised payment 3 cycles ago. I've replaced your manifold coils, recalibrated your navigation array, and fixed the mess you made of the oxygen scrubbers." "Avrex, buddy," Joe raised his hands placatingly. "Great timing. I was just about to transfer your credits when—" A thunderous bang echoed through the docking bay as the maintenance door was forcibly breached. 3 Krell hunters emerged, their scaled bodies adorned with the weapons and trophies of their profession. The leader, a particularly massive specimen with a scar running down his snout, locked eyes with Joe and let out a hissing roar. When I was rudely interrupted, Joe finished, diving for the cockpit. You might want to strap in. Avrex's protests died as he saw the Krell advancing. With surprising agility for his size, the cerulean mechanic slammed his lower right hand onto the ramp control while the upper pair worked in perfect coordination to seal the inner airlock. If we survive this quest, your debt doubles. Joe was already in the pilot's seat, his fingers dancing across the controls. The Cavalier's engines roared to life, repulsor lifts engaging before the pre-flight checks had even completed. Sophie's avatar, a translucent blue hologram of a woman with geometric patterns flowing through her form, appeared on the dashboard. Joe, the neural key contains an active tracking signal, she warned, and docking clamps are still engaged. Override the clamps, Joe commanded, powering up the shield generators. Outside, the Krell had drawn their weapons, heavy plasma throwers designed to disable ship engines. Avrex, can you bypass the docking authority? The Cerulean was already at the engineering station, all 4 hands working simultaneously on different controls. Their systems are remarkably primitive, he muttered, almost insulting. As the first plasma bolts struck the Cavalier's shields, Avrex completed his bypass. The docking clamps released with a resounding clang, and Joe immediately punched the thrusters to maximum. The ship lurched forward, scraping against the docking bay doors that were still in the process of opening. This is why you need a mechanic on retainer, Avrex shouted over the screech of metal on metal. The Cavalier burst from Nexus 9's docking ring, trailing sparks and debris. Joe banked hard, driving the ship into the planet's dense atmosphere. The hull temperature spiked immediately as friction superheated their exterior. Multiple pursuit craft detected, Sophie announced with algorithmic calm. Krell hunting vessels, heavily armed. Let's see how they like the atmospheric soup, Joe muttered, plunging the ship deeper into the planet's dense cloud layers. The Cavalier shuddered as it hit air thick with suspended particles. Visibility dropped to near zero, but Joe flew by instrumentation and instinct, pushing the ship through maneuvers that would strain both frame and inertial dampeners. Behind them, the Krell ships attempted to follow, their heavier vessels less suited to the sharp turns and sudden dives Joe executed. After 3 minutes of atmospheric aerobatics that left even the stoic Avrex clutching his seat with all 4 hands, Joe pulled up sharply, breaking free of the cloud cover and rocketing toward open space. Calculate jump to light speed, he ordered Sophie. Anywhere but here. Coordinates set for the penumbra sector, the AI confirmed. Hyperdrive charging. As the stars began to elongate around them, Joe allowed himself a brief smile. Another narrow escape to add to his legend. Now, Avrex said, his gill slits still flaring from the adrenaline equivalent coursing through his alien physiology. About my payment. Joe's response was lost in the blue flash of hyperspace as the Cavalier disappeared from normal space, leaving the Krell hunters and Nexus 9 far behind. Chapter 2, Decoding the Mystery. The gentle hum of the hyperdrive permeated the Cavalier's cabin as Joe studied the neural key now connected to the ship's systems. Its construction was unlike anything in current circulation, an organic crystal lattice suspended within a metallic frame, pulsing with its own inner light. Sophie, what do you make of this? Joe asked, adjusting the holographic display to enlarge the data structure. The AI's avatar materialized beside him, her geometric patterns shifting as she analyzed the information. The encryption is unlike any contemporary algorithm. It appears to be a nested quantum matrix with temporal variance. Each encryption layer mutates based on the previous one's solution. So can you crack it or not? Joe pressed. Given approximately 3.7 years of dedicated processing, yes. Joe let out a whistle. We don't have 3.7 years. From across the cabin, Avrex moved closer, his eyes, entirely black save for pinpoints of silver light, fixed on the holographic display. The cerulean mechanic had reluctantly agreed to postpone his payment demands until they were safely away from pursuing forces, but his four arms remained crossed in perpetual disapproval. "That's archaic human technology," he said, gesturing with one of his upper limbs. "Pre-collapse era encryption. My people studied your species' computational methods extensively." Joe raised an eyebrow. "You recognize this?" "The pattern structure. It's similar to what we discovered in abandoned Earth orbital platforms." Avrex's gill slits fluttered with what might have been excitement. "Our pattern recognition centers are naturally adapted to decipher such sequences, but even I would need specialized equipment." Joe leaned back in his chair, considering. "Sophie, set course for Umbra Station." "Umbra, the asteroid den of information thieves and data brokers." Avrex's voice carried a harmonic undertone of alarm. "That place is crawling with syndicate operatives." "Exactly why they'll have the tech we need," Joe replied, already plotting their approach in his mind. "Plus, I know someone there who owes me a favor." The journey to Umbra took 14 hours in hyperspace, during which Joe attempted to extract any unencrypted data from Dr. Moss's neural key. The results were frustratingly minimal, just a string of partial coordinates and a fragmented reference to the Ascendancy project. Umbra Station lived up to its name, perpetually shadowed in the lee of a massive asteroid that blocked the light from the system's dwarf star. The station itself had been carved directly into the smaller asteroids surrounding it, creating a haphazard collection of habitats, docking spurs, and communication arrays that resembled a metallic coral reef. "Transmitting docking request using our Zenith trader's identity," Sophie announced as they approached. "Syndicate patrols are conducting random scans of incoming vessels." "Keep our shields powered but inactive," Joe instructed, ready to raise them the moment we're compromised. They docked without incident at a peripheral spur, paying the exorbitant fee demanded by the automated system. Joe equipped himself with a compact pulse pistol hidden beneath his jacket and a collection of electronic countermeasures disguised as ordinary personal effects. "You're coming with me," he told Avrex. "A cerulean will attract less attention than a human in these parts." "And if I refuse?" The alien's gill slits narrowed. Joe shrugged. "Then you'll never see your payment. Besides, don't you want to know what's worth all this trouble?" Curiosity, the universal weakness of sentient species. Joe could see it working behind Avrex's alien eyes. "Fine," the mechanic conceded, "but after this we're square." Umbra's interior was a bewildering maze of narrow corridors, open market plazas, and shadowy alcoves where all manner of illegal transactions took place. The population was predominantly non-human, making Avrex's blue-grey form unremarkable while Joe kept his head down, a hood partially obscuring his features. Their destination was nested deep within the station's central asteroid, a nondescript door marked only by a subtle holographic symbol that changed shape when viewed from different angles. Joe pressed his palm against the reader beside the door, which scanned not his fingerprints, but the unique electrical signature of his nervous system. After a moment, the door slid open to reveal a chamber that appeared to be a cross between a library and a neural interface hub. Walls lined with physical data storage cubes gave way to suspended holographic workstations where information could be manipulated directly. At the center sat a thin, humanoid figure whose translucent skin revealed the pulsing circuitry of extensive neural implants beneath. "Joseph Quest," the figure spoke without looking up from his work. "I calculated a 63% probability you were dead." "Good to see you too, Xander," Joe replied, approaching the central workstation. "How's the information business?" Xander Grimm, the most notorious information broker in 3 sectors, finally raised his head. His eyes were entirely artificial, glossy black orbs that captured and processed visual data at vastly accelerated rates. "Profitable, as always," Xander replied, his voice unnervingly modulated to create the perfect auditory balance between authority and trustworthiness. "The question is, what information could possibly bring you to my doorstep, given the number of entities currently offering bounties for your capture?" Joe produced the neural key. "I need this decrypted, pre-collapse Earth encryption." Xander's artificial eyes focused on the device, analytical algorithms visibly running behind the obsidian surfaces. Interesting. Such artifacts usually pass through multiple hands before reaching mine. Where did you acquire this? From a friend, before she died. Dr. Alina Moss, Xander stated rather than asked. News of her assassination reached me 43 minutes after the event. The syndicate has taken an unusual interest. Joe tensed. You didn't mention the syndicate was looking for me. You didn't ask, Xander replied smoothly. But since we're sharing information, their interest appears to be in whatever Dr. Moss was pursuing rather than in you specifically. Until now, perhaps. Avrex shifted uncomfortably beside Joe. Can you decode the key or not? Xander's attention shifted to the cerulean, studying him with the same calculating gaze. I can. The question is one of price. He turned back to Joe. You still owe me for extracting you from that hegemony prison transport. Consider this the opportunity to clear my slate, Joe countered. Plus, I'll throw in exclusive rights to any non-essential data on the key. Xander was silent for precisely 3 seconds, an eternity in his accelerated cognitive processes. Acceptable, plus 10,000 credits. 5,000, Joe haggled automatically. 7,500, Xander concluded, and I'll clear your outstanding marker. With the deal struck, Xander connected the neural key to his specialized decryption systems. His translucent fingers danced through holographic interfaces, initiating algorithms that would have taken Sophie years to complete. As he worked, streams of decoded data began materializing on surrounding displays. Fascinating, Xander murmured. This encryption was designed by the Ascendancy project's chief security officer, Dr. Abigail Chen. Her work was considered revolutionary even before the collapse. Joe moved closer to the displays, scanning the fragments of information as they appeared. What was the Ascendancy project? One of humanity's last great endeavors before Earth's ecological systems failed, Xander explained, never pausing in his work. A generation ship designed to preserve human culture and knowledge. It was launched in the final days before the Great Collapse, carrying colonists and the accumulated biological and cultural heritage of Earth. More data streamed forth, resolving into coordinates, technical specifications, and historical records. Joe felt his pulse quicken as he began to grasp what Dr. Moss had discovered. It's still out there, he breathed, after all these centuries. Xander's decryption reached the final layers, revealing the full contents of the neural key. At the center of the main display appeared a rotating image of an enormous cylindrical vessel with habitat rings and external agriculture domes. The Ascendancy, Xander confirmed. According to these records, it experienced critical systems failures shortly after launch. The ship diverted all resources to preservation protocols, specifically protecting something called the Genesis Codex. The Genesis Codex, Avrex inquired, all 4 of his arms now uncrossed as he leaned forward with evident interest. A complete genetic archive of Earth's biodiversity, Xander explained, scanning the data. Every species, every variation, every ecosystem, preserved at the molecular level, with complete terraforming protocols and implementation methodologies. Joe let out a low whistle. That would be worth incalculable sums, Xander finished for him. Terraforming corporations would pay literal fortunes for such knowledge. Ecological preservation foundations would consider it priceless. And the cultural value to humanity's remaining colonies. He paused, his artificial eyes fixing on Joe. Now I understand why the syndicate is involved. The information broker's head suddenly tilted, as though listening to some inaudible signal. We have a problem. My external sensors have detected a sophisticated scanning probe outside this facility. Syndicate design. Joe cursed. How long do we have? Minutes at most. The probe is mapping internal architecture. Xander was already disconnecting the neural key and compressing the decoded data into a secure transfer chip. I've included the complete coordinates and all accessible information about the Ascendancy systems. The rest is up to you. Joe accepted both items, tucking them securely into his jacket. We're square now, Xander. The information broker's artificial lips curved in what might have been a smile. Indeed, though I suspect our paths will cross again, assuming you survive what comes next. He gestured to a concealed door at the rear of his chamber. That passage will lead you to the secondary maintenance docks, less monitored. As Joe and Avrex hurried toward the exit, Xander called after them. Quest. Remember, the Ascendancy was designed to recognize human genetic signatures. That might be useful information. They navigated the narrow maintenance passage at a brisk pace, emerging into a less developed section of Umbra Station, where cargo was processed through automated systems with minimal organic oversight. We need to get back to the Cavalier, Joe muttered, checking the station's layout on his portable display. If the syndicate has tracking drones, they'll... He stopped abruptly, pulling Avrex into a recessed doorway as a sleek, disc-shaped drone glided past their position. Its central eye pulsed with scanning energy, methodically mapping the corridor ahead. Syndicate Hunter-Seeker, Joe whispered. Advanced model. The drone paused, its sensors detecting some anomaly, and began to double back toward their hiding place. Joe reached slowly into his pocket and removed a small metallic sphere. With practiced precision, he rolled it down the corridor away from them. 5 seconds later, the sphere emitted a powerful electromagnetic pulse, temporarily disabling the drone and any other electronic surveillance within a 10-meter radius. The moment the drone clattered to the floor, Joe and Avrex sprinted in the opposite direction. The syndicate doesn't deploy hunter-seekers for minor targets, Avrex noted as they ran. They're pulling out significant resources. I'm flattered, Joe replied dryly. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing an open atrium. Above them, through the transparent dome, a sleek black vessel had taken position directly over the station. Its design was unmistakable, the blade-like prow and retractable weapon arrays of an obsidian syndicate interceptor. That complicates things, Joe murmured, calculating rapidly. Sophie, status report. His communicator crackled with the AI's voice. Syndicate forces have established a perimeter around our docking spur. Additionally, I've detected Krell hunting vessels entering the system. Everyone wants a piece of this action, Joe grimaced. We need an alternative exit strategy. Avrex's 4 eyes narrowed as he scanned the atrium. There, he pointed with his lower left arm. Cargo processing. Those containers are being loaded for immediate departure. Joe nodded. Sophie, prepare the Cavalier for remote piloting. Launch on my signal and rendezvous at these coordinates. He transmitted a set of numbers through his secure channel. They made their way to the cargo processing area, where automated systems were loading standardized containers onto small transport vessels. Identifying a container marked for immediate departure, Joe quickly bypassed its security lock. After you, he gestured to Avrex. The cerulean folded his large frame uncomfortably into the container. This is undignified. Better undignified than dead, Joe replied, squeezing in beside him before sealing the container from inside. Minutes later, they felt the container being lifted and loaded onto a transport. Through a small viewing port, Joe watched as they were carried away from the station. Sophie, execute launch protocol Windrunner, he transmitted. Rendezvous at the coordinates in 30 minutes. As the cargo transport cleared Umbra Station's immediate vicinity, alarms suddenly blared throughout the vessel. Their container had been flagged for inspection. Time to go, Joe announced, activating the emergency release on their container. The outer shell blew apart in a controlled detonation, exposing them to the vacuum of space. Both were wearing the compact emergency EVA suits they'd donned before entering the container. Joe activated his suit's propulsion system, guiding them away from the confused cargo transport toward their rendezvous point. Behind them, chaos erupted as the Cavalier, piloted remotely by Sophie, burst from its docking spur, evading syndicate vessels with a series of pre-programmed evasive maneuvers. The distraction worked perfectly, drawing pursuit away from the 2 floating figures. 28 minutes later, the Cavalier arrived at the rendezvous point, extending its airlock to receive them. Once aboard, Joe immediately took the controls, plugging in the coordinates from Dr. Moss's data. The Erebus Nebula, he announced, studying the navigation charts. That's where we'll find the Ascendancy. The Erebus Nebula. Avrex's gill slits flared in alarm. That region is notorious for spatial anomalies and radiation storms. Navigation is nearly impossible. Which makes it the perfect hiding place for a ship that doesn't want to be found, Joe replied, engaging the hyperdrive. Sophie, set course. Maximum speed. As the stars stretched into lines around them, Joe finally allowed himself to breathe. They had the coordinates. They had escaped, temporarily at least, and they were on their way to potentially the greatest archaeological find in human history. The Genesis Codex awaited. Chapter 3. Race to the Ascendancy. Cavalier sped through hyperspace, its modified engines pushing well beyond manufacturer specifications. In the cockpit, Joe studied the detailed information about the Ascendancy that Xander had extracted from the neural key. The holographic display showed the massive generation ship in all its intended glory. A 10-kilometer cylindrical vessel with rotating habitat rings, agricultural domes, and advanced propulsion systems that had been cutting-edge technology before the Great Collapse. Sophie, how long until we reach the coordinates? Joe asked, manipulating the hologram to examine the ship's interior schematics. Approximately 16 hours at current velocity, the AI replied. Though I should note that our hyperdrive is showing signs of stress. Operating at 142% of recommended output is not sustainable. From the engineering station, Avrex grunted in agreement. The cerulean had been making minor repairs since their escape from Umbra, his 4 arms allowing him to work on multiple systems simultaneously. Your disregard for mechanical limitations is astounding, he remarked, adjusting a power coupling with his upper right hand while his lower set calibrated the ship's backup stabilizers. This vessel requires a complete overhaul of its propulsion system. The Cavalier's gotten me out of worse situations, Joe defended, patting the console affectionately. She's temperamental but reliable. Avrex made a harmonious sound that Joe had come to recognize as the cerulean equivalent of a snort. Like a pilot, perhaps. Joe swiveled his chair to face the alien mechanic. Speaking of which, you never did explain how you got mixed up with the syndicate, not typical for a cerulean. Avrex's movements paused momentarily, all 4 of his arms freezing in mid-task. His silver-flecked eyes fixed on Joe with an unreadable expression. My people evolved in the oceanic depths of Cerulii Prime, he finally said, resuming his work with deliberate precision. Our ancestral waters have been in my family's stewardship for 17 generations. The syndicate acquired the mineral rights to our region after the hegemony's economic collapse. They now hold the deed to our waters. And they're holding it over you, Joe surmised. What's so valuable about these waters? They contain rare trace elements essential for quantum computing. But to my people, they are sacred, the birthplace of our civilization. Avrex's gill slits fluttered with emotion. I maintain their ships, their stations, whatever they require, and in exchange, they allow my family to remain as caretakers of our own ancestral home. Joe nodded slowly, understanding dawning. So the Genesis Codex would be valuable enough to purchase our freedom, Avrex confirmed. Why do you seek it, human? You have no lost homeworld to reclaim. Joe turned back to the holographic display, considering the question. I've spent my life finding what others have lost. Pieces of history, forgotten knowledge, abandoned technology. Most treasure hunters seek profit. I'm not opposed to that part. But what drives me is discovery. Humanity scattered after Earth's collapse. We lost so much of who we were. Each artifact I recover helps reconnect us to our past. Noble sentiments for a man with bounties in 12 systems, Avrex observed dryly. Joe laughed. Never claimed to be a saint, but the Genesis Codex is the ultimate find. Everything that made Earth what it was, preserved at the molecular level, that's worth all the risk. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alarm from the navigation console. Sophie's avatar appeared, her geometric patterns pulsing with urgency. Proximity alert. A vessel has just dropped out of hyperspace directly in our wake. Syndicate interceptor configuration. Joe immediately accessed the rear scanners. Sure enough, the sleek black shape of a syndicate pursuit vessel had appeared, its forward weapons already charging. How did they track us through hyperspace? Joe demanded. Avrex moved swiftly to the sensor array, all four hands working in concert. The neural key, he concluded after a moment. It must contain a quantum-entangled tracer, impossible to detect because it doesn't emit any conventional signal. Before Joe could respond, the Cavalier shuddered violently as the interceptor's first salvo struck their aft shields. Shields at 63%, Sophie reported. Their weapons are specifically calibrated to disrupt our hyperdrive field. Joe's hands flew across the controls, initiating evasive patterns within the limitations of hyperspace travel. Can we outrun them? Negative. Their vessel is purpose-built for pursuit. We have approximately 8 minutes before shield failure at current attack intensity. Then we change the game, Joe decided. Sophie, plot a course through the Catteric asteroid field. We'll drop out of hyperspace there. Avrex looked up sharply. The Catteric field. Those asteroids are highly unstable. Many contain volatile compounds that detonate on impact. Exactly, Joe grinned. Our friends back there are flying a much larger ship with less maneuverability. Sophie, execute on my mark. The AI complied, calculating the precise coordinates for their hyperspace exit. Joe felt the familiar tension building in his chest, the exhilarating blend of fear and focus that had kept him alive through countless close calls. Mark. The stars snapped back into points of light as the Cavalier dropped out of hyperspace. Immediately they were surrounded by the massive, slowly tumbling rocks of the Catteric asteroid field, a navigational hazard that most pilots avoided at all costs. Joe didn't hesitate, driving the ship directly into the densest part of the field. His hands moved with instinctive precision, threading the Cavalier between floating boulders the size of small moons. They've followed us out of hyperspace, Sophie announced. The interceptor is in pursuit, but maintaining greater distance from the asteroids. Smart, Joe muttered, but cautious won't catch us. He banked the ship hard around a particularly massive asteroid, then cut the main engines briefly to let momentum carry them into the shadow of another. The maneuver worked. The interceptor lost visual contact, forced to rely on sensors that were increasingly confused by the mineral composition of the surrounding rocks. They're launching seeker drones, Sophie warned. 6 units designed to track and attach to our hull. Joe nodded. Avrex, I need you to access the external maintenance hatches. Can you jury-rig our shield harmonics to create a repulsion field? The cerulean was already moving toward the engineering bay. Temporarily, yes, but it will further strain our power systems. Do it, just enough to keep those drones from latching on. As Avrex worked, Joe continued to navigate the treacherous field, occasionally scraping the Cavalier's hull against smaller asteroids to leave confusing debris trails for their pursuers. The ship protested with alarming creaks and groans, but held together through maneuvers that would have torn lesser vessels apart. 5 minutes later, Avrex's voice came through the internal comm. Repulsion field active, limited to port and starboard rear quadrants. Good enough, Joe replied, spotting an opportunity ahead. A cluster of asteroids was drifting together, their proximity creating a natural choke point. Beyond them lay a particularly large asteroid with a distinctive reddish hue, the telltale sign of highly unstable nixium compounds. Joe gunned the engines, threading the needle between the converging asteroids. As expected, the seeker drones followed, only to be repelled by Avrex's modified shield. They tumbled off course, colliding with the surrounding rocks. 2 exploded on impact, while the others ricocheted unpredictably. The syndicate interceptor, still in pursuit but now falling behind, had to navigate the same narrow passage. As it emerged from between the asteroids, Joe executed his trap. He fired the Cavalier's modest weapons directly at the large reddish asteroid, not to destroy it, but to destabilize its surface. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Nixium, when agitated, creates a cascading molecular reaction. The asteroid's surface erupted in a series of explosions, sending superheated fragments in all directions. Joe had already pushed the Cavalier to maximum acceleration, clearing the blast radius by mere seconds. The interceptor wasn't so fortunate. While its shields prevented complete destruction, the vessel was caught in the explosion, tumbling out of control as secondary systems failed. Its sleek hull, now scarred and venting atmosphere in multiple locations, drifted listlessly among the asteroids. "Direct hit," Joe announced with satisfaction. "Sophie, resume course to the Erebus Nebula, maximum sustainable speed." "Calculating," the AI responded. "However, I must report that our hyperdrive has sustained significant damage during the escape maneuvers. Operating capacity is reduced to 38%. Joe's triumphant smile faded. "How long to reach the coordinates?" "Approximately 52 hours, at reduced capacity." Avrex returned to the cockpit, his blue-gray skin showing darker patches of fatigue. "The hyperdrive motivator is cracked. I can maintain our current speed, but no more. Any attempt to increase output would result in catastrophic failure." Joe leaned back in his chair, considering their options. "The Syndicate interceptor is disabled but not destroyed. They'll send a recovery team, and once they extract the tracking data, they'll know exactly where we're headed," Avrex finished. "And they won't be the only ones. If the Krell hunters have acquired the same information, they'll also be converging on the Ascendancy's coordinates." "Then we proceed as planned," Joe decided. "We may not be the first to arrive, but we'll have one advantage they don't." He tapped his chest. "Human DNA. If Xander's information is correct, the Ascendancy's security systems were designed to recognize human genetic signatures." For the next 2 days, the Cavalier limped toward the Erebus Nebula. Avrex worked tirelessly to maintain their damaged hyperdrive, while Joe studied every scrap of information about the Ascendancy's layout and systems. The more he learned, the more he understood why Dr. Moss had been so determined to reach it first. The Genesis Codex wasn't merely a collection of DNA samples. It was the complete biological legacy of Earth, paired with the technological knowledge to implement it. The ability to restore extinct species, rebuild lost ecosystems, and potentially transform uninhabitable worlds into mirrors of humanity's lost home planet. In the hands of corporations, it would become a proprietary technology, accessible only to the wealthiest colonies. In the hands of preservation foundations, it could benefit all remaining human settlements. And in Joe's hands, well, that remained to be seen. As they approached the edge of the nebula, Sophie detected unusual energy readings. The swirling gases that comprised the Erebus Nebula, named for the ancient Greek personification of darkness, obscured conventional sensors, but distinct patterns were visible. "Multiple vessels are already present at the coordinates," the AI reported. "I detect the characteristic energy signatures of Krell hunting ships and syndicate vessels." Joe's jaw tightened. "How many?" "At least 3 Krell vessels and 2 syndicate ships. Their configuration suggests they arrived recently and have established positions around a central point, presumably the Ascendancy itself." "Can we get visual confirmation?" Joe asked. "Negative. The nebula's particulate density prevents optical clarity beyond 2,000 kilometers. We would need to approach more closely." Joe considered their situation. Direct confrontation was suicide. The Cavalier was a modified scout vessel, not a warship, but perhaps that was their advantage. While the others would be using primary docking points, expecting resistance, he could look for alternative access. "Sophie, analyze the schematics of the Ascendancy again. Look for maintenance access points, emergency airlocks, anything that might be overlooked by someone unfamiliar with human vessel design." The AI processed the request, comparing the original schematics with projected deterioration models. After several minutes, a section of the holographic display highlighted. "I have identified a potential entry point. The external radiator array includes a maintenance airlock designed for EVA repair access. Its positioning would render it nearly invisible unless specifically sought, particularly if the radiator panels are extended." Joe studied the highlighted section and nodded. "Perfect. That's our way in. Set course, minimal power signatures. Let's slip in while everyone else is focused on the main prize." The Cavalier edged closer to the nebula's heart, running with reduced power to minimize detection. Through the viewport, swirling clouds of cosmic gas, blues, purples, and ominous reds, obscured their destination. Occasionally, flashes of energy weapons could be seen in the distance, suggesting that the competition for access to the Ascendancy had already turned violent. Finally, as they penetrated deeper into the nebula, a massive silhouette began to emerge from the cosmic haze. The generation ship Ascendancy hung in space like a monument to humanity's past ambitions, a colossal cylinder stretching over 10 kilometers from end to end. Once gleaming, its hull was now pitted with micrometeorite impacts and darkened by centuries of cosmic radiation. The rotating habitat rings had long since stopped turning, frozen in eternal stillness. My ancestors studied the accounts of these vessels, Avrex murmured, his normally pragmatic tone softened by genuine awe. The last great works of human engineering before the collapse. We never believed any had survived. Joe felt a similar reverence as he gazed upon the ancient ship. Despite its dormant state, emergency lights still flickered across its surface, a testimony to the ingenuity of its creators that any systems functioned after centuries adrift. "Sophie, scan for activity," he instructed. The AI complied, directing the Cavalier's sensors toward the massive vessel. "I detect multiple points of forced entry. The Krell and Syndicate forces appear to be accessing the ship through primary airlocks and cargo bays. Internal power signatures suggest automated defense systems have been activated." "They're fighting the ship's own security," Joe realized. "Good, that's our window. Take us in toward the radiator array, minimal thrust." As they approached, they could see the external radiator panels, massive structures designed to dissipate heat from the ship's original fusion reactors. As Sophie had predicted, tucked between two of the largest panels was a small airlock, its presence barely noticeable against the complex geometry of the radiators. "No signs of forced entry at this location," Sophie confirmed. "The airlock appears intact, though dormant." Joe nodded, rising from his chair. "I'm going EVA. Avrex, I need you to keep the Cavalier at a safe distance, but ready for immediate extraction." The cerulean's 4 eyes focused on him intently. "You intend to enter alone?" "I'll have a better chance bypassing the security systems," Joe explained. "Human DNA, remember. Besides, someone needs to watch our exit." Avrex considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but maintain constant communication. At the first sign of trouble." "I'll call for backup," Joe promised, already moving toward the airlock. "Just be ready to extract me quickly if things go sideways." Joe donned his EVA suit, a flexible model designed for treasure hunting rather than prolonged space exposure. Its reinforced joints and integrated tool systems made it ideal for archaeological expeditions, but sacrificed some radiation protection for mobility. "Sophie, transfer relevant schematics to my helmet display," he instructed as he checked his equipment. His modified pulse pistol, sonic toolkit, and emergency medical supplies were all secured to his suit's utility harness. "Transfer complete," the AI confirmed. "I have also prepared a specialized authentication protocol based on the Ascendancy's security parameters. It may assist in gaining access." "Thanks," Joe replied, stepping into the Cavalier's airlock. "Keep this channel open." The airlock cycled, and Joe found himself floating free in the nebula's spectral glow. Using his suit's maneuvering thrusters, he propelled himself toward the distant shape of the Ascendancy's maintenance airlock. Around him, the nebula's gases swirled in ethereal patterns, occasionally illuminated by distant flashes as the ongoing battle between competing factions and the ship's defenses continued. After several minutes of careful navigation, Joe reached the auxiliary airlock. Up close, the Ascendancy's hull was even more impressive and more damaged than it had appeared from a distance. The once smooth metal was now textured with micrometeorite impacts and discolored by centuries of exposure to cosmic radiation. The airlock itself was surprisingly small, designed for utility rather than comfort. Its external controls were dark, suggesting power had been diverted from this section long ago. Joe attached a portable power unit to the control panel, providing enough energy to activate its basic functions. To his surprise, the panel lit up immediately, displaying an archaic interface that would have been cutting-edge technology before the collapse. A fingerprint scanner and physical keypad, security measures that had been obsolete for centuries, but were nonetheless familiar to Joe from his studies of ancient human technology. "Primitive but effective," he murmured to himself. Modern alien technology had evolved far beyond such simple biometric checks, which was precisely why they would never think to try them. Joe removed his right glove and pressed his palm against the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a green light flickered across the panel, and a mechanical female voice, distorted by time and power fluctuations, spoke through his helmet comm. Human genetic pattern recognized. Welcome, maintenance personnel. Please enter security code for access verification. Joe smiled. Sophie, transmit that authentication protocol. Through his suit's communication system, Sophie sent a series of codes derived from the Ascendancy's original security parameters. The airlock panel processed this information, lights blinking as ancient algorithms ran their course. Finally, with a heavy mechanical groan, the outer door began to cycle open. Stale air hissed out around the imperfect seal, crystallizing instantly in the vacuum of space. The airlock beyond was dark but intact. "I'm in," Joe reported to the Cavalier, proceeding with entry. He pushed himself into the small chamber and activated the cycling mechanism. The outer door sealed behind him with ponderous slowness, and pressurization began. His suit sensors indicated the air was technically breathable. The ship's life support systems had somehow maintained minimal functionality over the centuries, but stale and low in oxygen. When the inner door finally opened, Joe Quest stepped into the Ascendancy, becoming the first human to walk its corridors in over 500 years. Chapter 4, First Contact. The corridor beyond the airlock was dimly lit by emergency strips that cast everything in a ghostly blue glow. Joe kept his helmet on, relying on its enhanced visual modes to navigate the shadowy passage. His boots made soft thuds against the metal floor, each step echoing in the enclosed space, the first human footfalls here in centuries. "Sophie, are you receiving my telemetry?" He spoke softly into his comm. "Affirmative," the AI responded. "Signal is degraded by the ship's hull composition, but sufficient for communication. Avrex is maintaining position at the predetermined coordinates." Joe activated his helmet's recording function, documenting everything he saw. The corridor walls were adorned with informational panels and artistic renderings of Earth, landscapes, cityscapes, and natural wonders that no longer existed. Despite the low light and centuries of neglect, the images remained hauntingly clear, preserved by the ship's environmental systems. "This is incredible," Joe murmured, pausing to examine a detailed mural depicting the Grand Canyon. "It's a museum of lost Earth." As he proceeded deeper into the ship, the corridor widened into what appeared to have been a welcome center for new arrivals. Display cases contained artifacts from Earth, books, scientific instruments, cultural objects, carefully preserved behind transparent barriers. Holographic projectors, now dormant, were positioned throughout the space. Joe approached one of the projectors and connected his portable power unit. To his surprise, it activated immediately, flickering to life with a hologram of a smiling woman in an antiquated uniform bearing the Ascendancy Project insignia. "Welcome, colonists, to your new home," the hologram greeted, her image occasionally distorting with age-related degradation. "The Ascendancy is designed to sustain our journey for generations until we reach our destination star system. This orientation center will familiarize you with ship operations, community guidelines, and your role in our mission to preserve humanity's legacy." The recording continued, explaining daily life aboard the generation ship, details that would have been essential for colonists, but now served only as a ghostly echo of unfulfilled hopes. Joe was about to disconnect the power unit when an ominous mechanical sound came from further down the corridor. He quickly extinguished the hologram and took cover behind a display case, pulse pistol drawn. 3 maintenance robots rounded the corner, their once utilitarian designs now modified by centuries of autonomous adaptation. What had been simple repair drones now moved with predatory purpose, tools reconfigured into crude but effective weapons. Their optical sensors swept the chamber, searching. "Sophie," Joe whispered, "I've encountered security drones. Appear to be maintenance units repurposed for defense." The ship systems likely initiated protection protocols when the Krell and Syndicate forces breached the primary entrances, Sophie responded. Without human oversight, The AI would have defaulted to preserving ship integrity at all costs. Joe remained motionless as the robots methodically searched the orientation center, their sensors not yet sophisticated enough to detect him in his hiding place. He analyzed their movement patterns, noting the predictable sweep of their scanners and the limitations of their articulation joints. When one robot passed particularly close to his position, Joe observed something crucial. Its optical sensor briefly flickered when it turned, revealing a reset cycle in its ancient processing unit. A vulnerability. As the robots separated to search different sections, Joe made his move. Timing his approach to coincide with the sensor reset, he slipped behind the first robot and attached a small electromagnetic disruptor to its processing core. The device activated silently, sending the robot into a confused loop of contradictory commands. The other two robots immediately registered the anomaly and converged on their malfunctioning companion. Joe used this distraction to sprint across the chamber toward a personnel elevator indicated on his helmet display. Just as he reached the elevator doors, one of the robots detected his movement and emitted a shrill alarm. Both functioning units pivoted and launched toward him, maintenance pincers extended menacingly. Joe slapped the elevator call button, but the system responded sluggishly after centuries of disuse. The robots closed the distance rapidly. With no choice left, Joe turned to face them, pulse pistol raised. The first shot caught the leading robot squarely in its optical sensor, shutting down its targeting systems. It continued forward on preset momentum, forcing Joe to dive aside as it crashed into the elevator doors. The second robot adjusted its approach, deploying a welding torch that now functioned as an improvised cutting tool. Joe fired again, aiming for the joint connecting the torch to the robot's arm. The pulse energy severed the connection, sending the superheated torch tumbling across the floor. But the robot continued its advance, additional tools emerging from its chassis. The elevator chimed unexpectedly, its doors grinding open behind Joe. He backed inside, continuing to fire strategic shots at the approaching robot's mobility systems. As the doors began to close, the damaged robot wedged its remaining arm into the gap, forcing them open again. Joe aimed carefully and fired one last shot at the robot's central power distribution node, a weakness he'd identified in similar maintenance models during previous expeditions. The robot shuddered, its systems overloading, before collapsing inert in the doorway. With a strained mechanical groan, the elevator doors closed, crushing through the disabled robot's arm. The elevator began its descent toward the central habitat ring, leaving the security drones behind. Joe sank against the wall, catching his breath. "Sophie, update Avrex. I've encountered automated security, but am proceeding deeper into the ship. The habitat ring is my next stop." "Message relayed," Sophie confirmed. "Avrex expresses concern about increased syndicate activity. They appear to be deploying additional forces to the Ascendancy." "Tell him to stay alert, but maintain position," Joe instructed. "I need to reach the ship's core where the Genesis Codex is likely stored." The elevator continued its descent, occasionally shuddering as ancient mechanisms struggled against time and neglect. Joe used these moments to check his equipment and study the ship's schematics on his helmet display. According to the plans, the Ascendancy was designed with concentric layers. The outer hull contained maintenance systems, storage, and emergency facilities. The middle sections housed the habitat rings where colonists would have lived in Earth-like conditions. At the very center lay the ship's core, containing both the primary reactor and, most importantly, the biological preservation vaults where the Genesis Codex would be kept. The elevator finally slowed, coming to a halting stop. A computerized voice announced, "Habitat Ring Level 1, Agricultural Sciences Section." As the doors opened, Joe found himself facing a scene straight from ancient Earth, but with a disturbing twist. What had once been carefully planned agricultural research plots had, over centuries of automated maintenance, evolved into a chaotic, primeval forest. Massive trees had broken free of their designated growing areas, their roots cracking through flooring and their branches reaching toward lighting systems. Smaller plants crowded every available space, creating a dense undergrowth that obscured the original pathways. More alarmingly, The plants showed signs of unusual adaptation. Some had developed thorns that seemed to track his movement, while others released visible spores when he drew near. The ship's controlled environment had become an evolutionary laboratory where Earth's flora had continued developing without human oversight. "Sophie, are you seeing this?" Joe whispered, his helmet camera panning across the transformed landscape. "Affirmative," the AI responded. "The agricultural systems appear to have continued functioning autonomously. Without human intervention, natural selection would have favored aggressive growth and defensive adaptations." Joe cautiously stepped into the overgrown habitat, pulse pistol ready. The air here was thick with oxygen, a result of centuries of uncontrolled photosynthesis, and heavy with unfamiliar scents. His suit sensors detected numerous airborne compounds, some potentially toxic. "Keeping my helmet sealed," he reported. "The atmosphere contains unknown biological agents." He began making his way through the dense vegetation, following what appeared to be the remnants of a main pathway. The original ceiling, designed to simulate Earth's sky with lighting panels, was now largely obscured by the canopy of massive trees. Only occasional flickers of blue light penetrated the foliage, creating an eerie, dappled illumination. As Joe pushed deeper into the forest, he became aware of subtle movements in the undergrowth, not random brush in circulation currents, but deliberate, coordinated responses to his presence. A vine near his foot suddenly lashed upward, attempting to coil around his ankle. Joe jumped back just in time, watching in fascination as the plant writhed in apparent frustration before slowly retracting. "The plants have developed rudimentary hunting mechanisms," he observed, careful to scan the ground ahead before each step. "Likely evolved to capture the small maintenance drones or other automated systems for mineral extraction." Progress was slow and treacherous. Twice more, plants attempted to ensnare him, once with sticky, adhesive pods that dropped from overhanging branches, and again with rapidly extending tendrils that emerged from what appeared to be ordinary flowers. Joe used his sonic toolkit to emit disrupting frequencies that temporarily disoriented the aggressive flora, creating safe passages through the worst areas. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, Joe reached what the schematics identified as the central hub of the habitat ring. Here, the forest gave way to a large circular chamber where multiple pathways converged. At the center stood a dais with control consoles, now largely covered in climbing vines, but still showing signs of activity through blinking lights. "This should provide access to the ship's internal systems," Joe said, approaching the consoles. "If I can activate the central computer, I might be able to." His words were cut short by a low, mechanical hum that emanated from multiple points around the chamber. From concealed compartments in the walls, humanoid figures emerged, far more sophisticated than the maintenance robots he had encountered earlier. These were Sentinel units, designed with approximately human proportions and clearly intended for security operations. Their armor plating bore the Ascendancy insignia, and each carried non-lethal suppression weapons designed to subdue rather than kill. "Unauthorized presence detected," announced the lead sentinel in a voice that, unlike the maintenance robots, retained clear diction and authority. "Identify yourself or face containment protocols." Joe slowly raised his hands, keeping his movements non-threatening. "My name is Joe Quest. I'm human. Check your recognition protocols." The sentinels paused, optical sensors focusing on him with greater intensity. After a moment, the lead unit responded. "Human genetic signature confirmed. However, no matching colonist profile found in database. Security classification, potential intruder. Containment authorized." The sentinels began to advance in perfect coordination, their movements fluid and purposeful, far more dangerous than the repurposed maintenance units. Joe realized that these were dedicated security robots with sophisticated tactical programs and likely immune to the simple tricks that had worked earlier. "Sophie, I need options," he hissed into his comm. "The sentinels appear to be running original security protocols," the AI analyzed. "They recognize you as human, but not as authorized personnel. Try accessing the command console. You may be able to override their directives if you can establish higher authorization." Joe backed toward the central dais, keeping all sentinels in view. Worth a shot. As the circle of sentinels tightened around him, Joe reached the console and quickly brushed away the encroaching vines. The interface was archaic but functional, designed to be intuitive for human operators. He placed his palm on the biometric reader, hoping his human DNA would again provide an advantage. The console illuminated in response to his touch, accepting his genetic authentication but still displaying a restricted access warning. The sentinels continued their approach, now mere meters away. Joe quickly navigated through the security protocols, searching for emergency override options. His extensive knowledge of pre-collapse technology proved invaluable as he identified a system administrator backdoor, a feature often included in early AI systems as a failsafe. Authentication challenge required, the console displayed. Complete the following sequence to verify human cognition, Earth Prime Historical Database access. Below this message appeared a series of incomplete historical references that only a human familiar with Earth's history would recognize. The eagle has one small step for. We shall fight on the. Joe smiled despite the danger. The system was using humanity's cultural knowledge as the ultimate verification, something no alien race would easily replicate. He rapidly completed the phrases. The eagle has landed. One small step for man. We shall fight on the beaches. The console processed his answers, and the restricted access warning dissolved into a command interface. Just as the lead sentinel reached for him, Joe activated the security override, freezing all sentinel units in place. Administrative authority acknowledged, the system announced. Welcome, acting administrator. How may I assist you? Joe exhaled in relief, lowering his hands. Sophie, I've gained control of this sector's security systems. The sentinels are neutralized. Well done, the AI responded. However, I must inform you of a complication. Avrex reports that a Krell hunting party has detected the Cavalier's presence. He is implementing evasive procedures, but may need to temporarily withdraw from our rendezvous coordinates. Joe frowned. Tell him to prioritize the ship's safety. I'll find another way out if necessary. With the immediate threat neutralized, Joe turned his attention to the command console. The system held a wealth of information about the Ascendancy's history and current status. He quickly discovered logs from the ship's final active days, recorded by Captain Blana Glynn. Day 472, since departure. Critical systems continue to fail despite our best efforts. The cascade effect from the primary reactor breach has compromised life support throughout the habitation rings. We've made the decision to initiate emergency Protocol Omega. All remaining power will be diverted to the preservation vaults to maintain the Genesis Codex at all costs. This record is being left for any future discoverers. The Codex represents Earth's entire biological heritage. It must survive, even if we do not. I am ordering all remaining crew to the cryostasis chambers, though given the power constraints, survival is unlikely. This is Captain Glynn, signing off. Joe sat back, absorbing the implications. The crew had sacrificed themselves to preserve the Genesis Codex, understanding its importance to humanity's future. Their final act had been to ensure that Earth's legacy would survive, even as they faced their own mortality. Sophie, download all logs and technical data from this console, Joe instructed, especially anything related to the preservation vaults and access protocols. As Sophie began the data transfer, Joe explored the habitat control systems. He discovered he could modify environmental parameters and even deactivate the more aggressive plant defense mechanisms within a limited radius. This would make his continued journey considerably safer. The console also provided updated schematics of the ship's current state, revealing that entire sections had been sealed off following the reactor breach centuries ago. The most direct route to the central preservation vault would take him through 2 more habitat sections and then into the ship's core. Transfer complete, Sophie announced. I have compiled all relevant data on the Genesis Codex. It appears to be housed in a quantum storage matrix at the ship's core, maintained by dedicated power systems. According to these logs, the preservation vault requires specific access protocols based on Earth's ecological systems, essentially puzzles that only someone with knowledge of Earth's biodiversity could solve. Makes sense, Joe nodded. The final security measure will be understanding what you're trying to access. He was about to continue when a distant explosion reverberated through the habitat, powerful enough to shake loose vegetation from the canopy above. The Sentinel units briefly flickered, their systems momentarily disrupted by the power surge. Sophie, what was that? Analyzing seismic pattern, the AI responded after a moment. The explosion originated from the upper levels. It appears the Krell or syndicate forces have breached deeper into the ship and encountered major resistance from the security systems. Joe checked the console's ship-wide sensors, confirming Sophie's assessment. Multiple hostile signatures were now moving through the Ascendancy's upper levels, fighting their way past automated defenses. It was only a matter of time before they reached the habitat rings. I need to move faster, Joe decided, downloading the route to the preservation vault into his helmet display. The competing factions will tear this place apart looking for the Codex. As if to emphasize his point, the lights throughout the habitat flickered ominously. The Sentinels, still frozen by his override command, twitched as fluctuating power affected their systems. The ship's power grid is becoming unstable, Sophie warned. These intrusions are putting stress on century-old systems that were already operating beyond their intended lifespan. Joe quickly gathered his equipment and prepared to move on. Before leaving the control dais, he programmed the Sentinels with one final command: protect this sector from all non-human intruders. The robots acknowledged with synchronized nods, their weapons powering up as they took defensive positions around the chamber. They would now serve as an additional obstacle for any pursuers. Joe set off toward the inner habitat ring, moving with greater confidence now that he had deactivated the plant defenses in his path. Behind him, the sounds of distant conflict grew louder. The battle for the Ascendancy and the priceless Genesis Codex it contained was intensifying. What had begun as an archaeological expedition was rapidly becoming a race against time. Chapter 5. Joe moved swiftly through the transformed habitat, following the pathway illuminated on his helmet display. The route took him deeper into the ship, past hydroponics labs, where earth plants had evolved in isolation for centuries, developing characteristics never seen in their natural environment. Despite the danger, the scientist in him couldn't help but marvel at what he was witnessing, a unique evolutionary experiment playing out over hundreds of years. Sophie, are you still receiving my telemetry? He checked, ducking beneath a cluster of luminescent fruits that pulsed with an internal blue glow. Affirmative, though signal quality is deteriorating as you move deeper into the ship's structure, the AI responded. Avrex reports he has successfully evaded the Krell hunters, but has been forced to relocate the Cavalier to a position 3.2 kilometers from our original rendezvous point. Understood. Have him maintain stealth protocols and wait for my signal. Joe paused at an intersection where the path divided. According to his schematics, the left passage led toward residential quarters, while the right continued toward the ship's central core. I'm proceeding toward the inner habitat ring. The passage narrowed as he followed it, eventually opening into what had once been residential quarters for the ship's scientific personnel. Unlike the agricultural section with its rampant overgrowth, these areas showed different signs of age, personal belongings still arranged as if awaiting their owner's return, now covered in layers of dust preserved in the ship's sealed environment. Joe stepped into what appeared to have been the quarters of a senior researcher, Dr. Naomi Sharma, according to the nameplate beside the door. The room was modest but personalized. Family photos on the desk, scientific journals stacked neatly on shelves, and a half-written letter still displayed on an ancient computer terminal. Curiosity drew Joe to the terminal. To his surprise, it activated at his touch, power systems responding to human contact after centuries of dormancy. The letter on screen was addressed to Dr. Sharma's daughter, who had remained on Earth. My dearest Priya, by the time this reaches you, we will be beyond communication range. I want you to know that the work we are doing aboard the Ascendancy gives me hope. Earth may be dying, but we carry with us every living thing that made our home beautiful. The Genesis Codex contains not just DNA sequences, but the complete ecological relationships, the very blueprint of Earth's interconnected systems. Captain Glynn believes we may never see Earth again, but perhaps someday, generations from now, our descendants will use the Codex to recreate what we've lost on some distant world. I find comfort in knowing that even if humanity falters, we've preserved the knowledge to begin again. I miss you more than I can express. Know that in every DNA sequence I catalogue, in every ecosystem model I program into the Codex, I am preserving the world you loved, the meadows where you played as a child, the forests you studied in university, the oceans that always called to your spirit. With eternal love. Mother. Joe stood silently for a moment, touched by this personal glimpse into the mission of the Ascendancy. It wasn't just a scientific endeavor or a conservation project. It represented hope and love, the desire to preserve something precious for future generations. His contemplation was interrupted by the terminal suddenly displaying a security alert. Warning: multiple breaches detected in outer hull sections. Defense systems engaged. All personnel report to emergency stations. The message was centuries old, but its appearance now suggested the ship's systems were increasingly unstable, cycling through old protocols as power fluctuations disrupted their normal operations. Joe continued through the residential section, moving more urgently now. Each room told a similar story: lives interrupted, personal belongings abandoned as the crew responded to the cascading failures that would eventually doom the mission. It was a ghost ship in the truest sense, haunted not by supernatural entities, but by the echoes of human hopes that had never been realized. At the end of the residential corridor, Joe encountered a sealed pressure door marked Central Hub Access. Unlike the previous doors that had responded automatically to his presence, this one remained firmly closed, a red security light indicating lockdown protocols were active. "Sophie, I need to bypass a security door," Joe reported, examining the control panel. "Looks like it's on emergency lockdown." According to the schematics, that door leads to the central hub, the primary connection point between the habitat rings and the ship's core, Sophie confirmed. Security would be significantly higher for such a critical juncture. Joe studied the panel, noting it required both biometric authentication and an access code. The biometric scanner might accept his human DNA as it had elsewhere, but the code presented a problem. "I need to find an access code for a senior crew member," Joe muttered, turning back to scan the residential area. His eyes fell on Dr. Sharma's quarters, or perhaps a senior researcher. Returning to Dr. Sharma's terminal, Joe searched through the accessible files. Most were corrupted by time or encrypted beyond his ability to crack quickly, but a personal calendar remained intact. He scrolled through the entries, looking for anything that might serve as a security code. A recurring entry caught his attention. EC access 27,111,997, Project Genesis review. The numeric sequence appeared multiple times, always associated with restricted area access. Worth a try, Joe decided, returning to the security door. He placed his palm on the biometric scanner, which pulsed green in recognition of his human genetic pattern. When prompted for the access code, he entered 27,111,997. After a moment's processing, the security light changed from red to green, and the heavy door began to slide open with a hydraulic hiss. Beyond lay the central hub, once the beating heart of the Ascendancy's daily operations, now a tomb-like chamber illuminated only by emergency lighting. Unlike the sections Joe had previously traversed, the central hub showed signs of the crisis that had overtaken the ship. Chairs were overturned, equipment lay scattered as if abandoned in haste, and most telling of all, environmental suits hung empty on wall-mounted racks, their face plates dark and lifeless. In the center of the hub stood a circular command station with multiple terminals arranged in a ring. This would have been where the ship's officers coordinated activities across all sections. Joe approached cautiously, alert for any automated security measures. The command station activated as he drew near, holographic displays flickering to life around the circumference. Unlike the residential terminal, these systems required no physical contact, sensing his presence and responding automatically. "Captain's authentication detected," announced the system, misinterpreting his human DNA as belonging to a command-level officer. Accessing emergency protocols. A three-dimensional schematic of the Ascendancy materialized above the command station, showing real-time status of all ship systems. Large sections pulsed red, indicating damage or failure, while others showed amber for compromised functionality. Only a small portion at the very core of the ship displayed green, the preservation vaults where the Genesis Codex was stored. More concerning were the multiple intrusion points highlighted along the outer hull, showing where Krell and syndicate forces had breached the ship. Two separate groups were progressively moving inward, fighting through the Ascendancy's automated defenses as they converged on the central core. "Sophie, are you seeing this?" Joe asked, studying the intrusion patterns. "We've got multiple hostile forces closing in on the preservation vault from different vectors." "Confirmed," the AI responded. "Based on their current rate of progress, I estimate they will reach the central core within approximately 45 minutes. Joe nodded grimly. "Then I need to get there first." He turned his attention to the ship's logs, searching for information about the Genesis Codex and how to access it. The command station's archives were vastly more comprehensive than anything he'd encountered so far, containing detailed records of the Ascendancy's mission and the events leading to its failure. Captain Blana Glynn's final log entry appeared on the main display. "Final Captain's Log, Ascendancy Project. The situation has deteriorated beyond recovery. Primary reactor containment is failing. We've evacuated all non-essential personnel to cryostasis, but the truth is, with power levels dropping, the chambers will likely fail within weeks. I've made the decision to divert all remaining power to the preservation vaults. The Genesis Codex must survive. It's the only thing that matters now. I've initiated Protocol Omega-3. The vault's security systems have been programmed to recognize only human genetic signatures and to require specific knowledge of Earth's ecological systems for access. The Codex itself has been placed in quantum stasis, protected by multiple redundant systems. To any humans who may find this vessel in the future, the Genesis Codex represents our planet's entire biological heritage. Use it wisely. Remember the world we lost, and perhaps, someday, rebuild what we could not save. This is Captain Blana Glynn, signing off for the final time. May Earth's legacy live on. The log entry ended with technical specifications for accessing the preservation vault, including the series of biometric checkpoints and ecological knowledge tests that would guard the Genesis Codex. Joe downloaded this critical information to his helmet system. "Sophie, I'm proceeding to the central core. According to these logs, I'll need to pass through the inner habitat ring first." "Be advised," the AI cautioned. The inner habitat ring was dedicated to zoological preservation. If the pattern of autonomous evolution we observed in the agricultural section extends to animal specimens, you may encounter dangerous fauna. "Noted," Joe replied grimly, checking his pulse pistol's charge. "Any update from Avrex?" "He reports increasing syndicate activity near his position. A command vessel has entered the nebula, significantly larger than the previous interceptors we encountered." That was concerning news. If the syndicate had dispatched a command vessel, they were committing substantial resources to securing the Genesis Codex. Time was running short. Joe accessed the hub's control systems one last time, looking for anything that might slow down the approaching hostiles. He discovered he could initiate a security lockdown of several connecting corridors, which wouldn't stop the intruders permanently, but would force them to find alternative routes, buying him precious minutes. With the lockdown protocols activated, Joe headed for the inner habitat access door. Unlike the previous security door, this one responded immediately to his presence, recognizing his human genetic signature as authorized personnel. The corridor beyond sloped gently downward, leading toward the ship's core. Emergency lighting cast long shadows as Joe advanced, his footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The walls here were lined with information panels describing the zoological preservation efforts, detailed explanations of how Earth's fauna had been categorized, preserved, and studied aboard the Ascendancy. As Joe neared the inner habitat entrance, he began to hear sounds from beyond, chittering, rustling, and occasional high-pitched calls that were decidedly not mechanical in origin. Sophie's warning about evolved fauna suddenly seemed very relevant. The entrance to the inner habitat was a massive airlock designed to maintain separate environmental conditions. Joe approached the control panel, noting that this system, too, recognized his human genetic pattern and granted access without requiring additional authentication. Preparing to enter inner habitat, he reported to Sophie. If my signal cuts out due to interference, don't worry. I'll re-establish communication when I reach the central core. Understood, the AI responded. Avrex wishes you to know he will keep the engines hot, as you humans say. Joe smiled slightly at that. Tell him I appreciate it. The airlock cycled open, revealing a sight that momentarily took Joe's breath away. The inner habitat ring had been designed as a massive biodome, replicating various Earth ecosystems in connected sections. Originally, it would have contained carefully managed animal specimens and controlled environments. What it had become after centuries of isolation was something else entirely. The dome's ceiling, designed to simulate Earth's sky, now projected a perpetual twilight state, bathing everything in a bluish glow. The plant life here was even more aggressively evolved than in the agricultural section. Massive trees with luminescent bark, undergrowth that seemed to pulse with internal energy, and flowering vines that stretched impossibly toward the artificial light. More alarming were the signs of animal life, movement in the underbrush, eyes reflecting light from shadowed branches, and webs of unfamiliar construction spanning between trees. Earth's fauna, like its flora, had continued evolving in isolation, adapting to the closed ecosystem of the Ascendancy in ways no scientist could have predicted. Sophie, are you getting this? Joe whispered, scanning the environment with his helmet sensors. Signal degrading but sufficient, the AI confirmed. Remarkable biodiversity detected. These species have undergone significant evolutionary divergence from their Earth ancestors. Joe checked his helmet display, confirming the route through the inner habitat to the central core access point. According to the schematics, he would need to traverse approximately half a kilometer through what had once been a simulated rainforest environment. I'm proceeding through the inner habitat, he reported, drawing his pulse pistol but keeping it lowered. We'll maintain silence unless necessary. With that, Joe Quest stepped into what had effectively become an alien jungle, though one populated entirely by the evolved descendants of Earth species. The path ahead was barely visible, overgrown with vegetation that reconfigured itself as he watched, responding to his presence in subtle ways. He moved carefully, alert for any signs of danger. His treasure-hunting experience had taught him to respect unknown environments and to move with purpose, but without haste. The creatures of this habitat had never encountered a human before. Their reactions were unpredictable. After approximately 200 meters, Joe encountered his first direct evidence of faunal evolution. A creature resembling a squirrel, but with elongated limbs and gliding membranes that sparkled with bioluminescent patterns, observed him from a branch overhead. Its eyes, proportionally larger than its Earth ancestors, tracked his movement with evident intelligence. As Joe passed beneath its perch, the creature emitted a complex series of chirps that echoed through the canopy. Immediately, similar calls responded from multiple directions, a communication system warning others of his presence. The warning spread rapidly. Within moments, the ambient sounds of the habitat changed, a hushed expectancy falling over the area as its inhabitants assessed this new intruder. Joe quickened his pace slightly, aware that he was now the focus of countless evolved species. Halfway through the habitat, the path divided around a central water feature, once a controlled pond, now an expansive small lake with tributary streams extending in multiple directions. The water glowed with an internal blue luminescence, suggesting the presence of bioluminescent microorganisms. Joe consulted his route map, confirming that either path around the lake would lead to the central core access. He opted for the right-hand path, which appeared slightly less overgrown. As he skirted the lake's edge, movement in the water caught his attention. Something large was tracking him beneath the surface, a sinuous shape that matched his pace with predatory intent. Joe increased his speed, keeping a wary eye on the water. Without warning, the creature surged upward, breaching the surface in an explosion of luminescent droplets. Joe caught only a glimpse of an elongated, eel-like body with multiple fin arrays before he dove aside, narrowly avoiding powerful jaws lined with needle-like teeth. The creature, clearly an evolved descendant of some Earth aquatic species, crashed back into the water, immediately circling for another attack. Joe scrambled to his feet, pulse pistol now raised, but hesitated to fire. These creatures were unique evolutionary specimens, the last of their kind. Destroying one, even in self-defense, felt wrong. Instead, he activated his sonic toolkit, adjusting it to emit a frequency that water-dwelling predators typically found distressing. The high-pitched pulse, inaudible to human ears, penetrated the water's surface. The effect was immediate. The creature thrashed once, then retreated to deeper water, unwilling to challenge this unfamiliar defense. Joe continued along the path, now moving with greater urgency. The encounter had demonstrated the increased danger of this environment. These were not simply preserved specimens, but actively evolved predators, adapted to their artificial ecosystem. The final stretch of his journey through the inner habitat proved the most challenging. The path narrowed between dense vegetation that seemed almost deliberately obstructive, forcing Joe to push through foliage that recoiled at his touch. Small, flying creatures, perhaps evolved from insects or tiny avians, darted around him, their wings creating an unsettling chorus of buzzing sounds. At last, Joe reached the far boundary of the inner habitat, where another massive airlock stood, the final barrier between the habitat rings and the ship's central core. As he approached, the airlock sensors registered his presence, but instead of opening automatically, a holographic interface materialized before him. Access to Preservation Core requires administrative authentication, announced a computerized voice. Please complete ecological knowledge verification. A series of images appeared on the holographic display, various Earth ecosystems depicted in their pristine state. Below each image was an incomplete food web diagram, with key species missing from the ecological relationships. To verify understanding of Earth's ecological systems, complete each food web diagram by selecting appropriate species for each trophic level. Joe studied the first diagram, a temperate forest ecosystem missing its apex predator and primary decomposer species. Drawing on his extensive knowledge of Earth's lost biodiversity, he selected the grey wolf for the apex predator position and fungal mycelium networks for the decomposer role. The system processed his selections, confirming them as correct. 3 more ecological puzzles followed, each testing different aspects of environmental knowledge, ocean acidification effects, rainforest canopy relationships, and prairie seed dispersal mechanisms. Joe completed each puzzle correctly, applying both his archaeological expertise and the additional information he'd downloaded from the central hub. The holographic interface pulsed green in confirmation. Ecological knowledge verification complete. Human genetic authentication confirmed. Final security protocol, verbal authorization. The system paused, then prompted, "Please state the primary directive of the Ascendancy project." Joe recalled Captain Glynn's final log entry and responded clearly, "To preserve Earth's biological heritage for future restoration and renewal." The airlock cycled open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a sterile, white corridor that contrasted sharply with the wild habitat behind him. Emergency lighting strips pulsed along the floor, guiding the way toward the ship's core. "Sophie, I've reached the central core access point," Joe reported, his comms signal strengthening as he entered the more technologically dense section of the ship. "Any update on our pursuers?" "They have breached the outer habitat ring," the AI confirmed. "Multiple hostile forces are converging on your position from different vectors. Estimated time until they reach the central core, 12 minutes. "Understood. I'm proceeding to the preservation vault." Joe moved quickly through the white corridor, which curved gently as it followed the cylindrical shape of the ship's core. Unlike the habitat sections with their rampant growth and evolution, the preservation core remained pristine, protected by multiple redundant systems that had maintained its integrity through the centuries. At the corridor's end stood the final barrier, the entrance to the Genesis Codex vault itself. A circular door of gleaming metal, unmarked save for the Ascendancy project insignia at its center. As Joe approached, the insignia illuminated, and a final holographic interface appeared, more sophisticated than any he had encountered previously. From it emerged the figure of a woman in a scientific uniform, her features distinct enough to suggest she was modeled after a specific person rather than a generic avatar. "Welcome to the Genesis Codex Preservation Vault," the hologram greeted him. "I am the custodian, the artificial intelligence tasked with protecting Earth's biological legacy. You are the first human to reach this point in 537 years, 4 months, and 22 days. The custodian studied Joe with an uncannily lifelike gaze. "My sensors detect multiple hostile forces approaching this location. Before granting access to the Genesis Codex, I must verify not only your humanity, but your intentions. The knowledge contained within this vault could rebuild worlds or devastate them if misused." A series of ethical scenarios appeared around Joe, each presenting a potential use for the Codex technology. Scenario 1. A corporation wishes to use the Codex to engineer specialized organisms for mining toxic environments, potentially creating new ecological imbalances. Scenario 2. A preservation foundation proposes using the Codex to restore extinct species to terraformed worlds, recreating Earth's lost ecosystems. Scenario 3. A military power seeks to weaponize certain genetic sequences for biological warfare capabilities. Scenario 4. Independent researchers request access to study evolutionary pathways for scientific advancement with open-source distribution of findings. The custodian's expression remained neutral. How would you prioritize access to these entities? Your answer will determine whether you are granted entry. Joe considered carefully. This was not simply a security test, but a genuine ethical evaluation, the ship's final protection against misuse of its precious cargo. "The Preservation Foundation should have primary access," he answered. "Restoring Earth's lost species and ecosystems aligns with the original mission of the Ascendancy project. Independent researchers should have secondary access, provided their findings remain publicly available. The corporation would require strict oversight and limitations to prevent ecological damage." He paused before concluding firmly, the military application should be denied entirely. The Codex was created to preserve life, not to engineer new ways to destroy it. The custodian processed his response, her holographic form studying him intently. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she nodded. "Your values align with the core principles of the Ascendancy project. Access granted." The circular door began to rotate, complex locking mechanisms disengaging in sequence. As it opened, a soft blue light emanated from within, growing in intensity until it illuminated the entire corridor. "Sophie," Joe reported, his voice hushed with anticipation, "I'm entering the vault." Beyond the threshold lay a sight few humans had ever witnessed, and none for over 5 centuries. The Genesis Codex vault was a perfect sphere, its walls lined with crystalline storage matrices that pulsed with internal light. At the center, suspended in a containment field, floated a hand-sized crystalline structure of extraordinary complexity, the control interface for the entire system. "The Genesis Codex," the custodian explained, her hologram following Joe into the vault. "Over 8 billion distinct genetic sequences, complete ecological relationship models, terraforming protocols, and implementation methodologies. The entire biological heritage of Earth, preserved in quantum storage." Joe approached the floating crystal reverently. "How do I access it?" "The primary interface is keyed to human genetic signatures," the custodian explained. "Once bonded to a human host, the interface can translate the codex's contents and transfer selected data for implementation. Simply place your hand within the containment field." Before Joe could respond, a violent explosion shook the corridor outside, powerful enough to momentarily disrupt the vault's lighting. The custodian's hologram flickered. "Alert! Multiple hostile entities have breached the central core perimeter. Security systems failing." Joe moved toward the crystal without hesitation. After everything he'd witnessed aboard the Ascendancy, the sacrifice of its crew, the centuries of preserved hope, the evolved life continuing against all odds, He was more determined than ever to protect the Genesis Codex. "Sophie, inform Avrex to prepare for immediate extraction," he instructed. "We're about to have company." As distant weapons fire echoed from the corridor, Joe reached toward the floating crystal, his hand passing through the containment field. The moment his fingers touched the crystalline surface, an extraordinary sensation coursed through his body, as if every cell was simultaneously being scanned and recorded. The crystal responded to his touch, its internal light intensifying until it pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Filaments of blue energy extended from the crystal, wrapping around his arm and spreading across his body in intricate patterns that resembled DNA helices. "Bond established," the custodian announced. "The Genesis Codex now recognizes you as its custodian. The entire database has been synchronized with the interface crystal, which will remain attuned to your unique genetic signature." The energy filaments receded, leaving the crystal glowing with renewed intensity. As the containment field deactivated, the crystal settled gently into Joe's palm, warm and pulsing with the accumulated biological knowledge of an entire planet. "The interface will respond to your conscious directions," the custodian explained rapidly, her hologram now frequently disrupted by power fluctuations. "It can transfer specific genetic sequences and implementation protocols to compatible systems. Use it wisely." Another explosion, closer this time, rocked the vault. The custodian's hologram stabilized one final time. "Preservation protocol complete. Self-destruct sequence initiated. The Ascendancy has fulfilled its purpose. Earth's legacy has been passed to a new guardian. This vessel will now ensure no unauthorized entities can access or damage the preservation systems." Joe's eyes widened. "Self-destruct? How long?" 15 minutes until reactor containment failure. "Good luck, custodian. May Earth's legacy live on through you." With those words, the hologram dissipated, leaving Joe alone in the vault with the Genesis Codex crystal pulsing in his hand. Its light seemed to penetrate his skin, creating the unsettling but not unpleasant sensation that the crystal was now somehow a part of him. "Sophie, the ship is going to self-destruct in 15 minutes, Joe reported urgently, securing the crystal in a specialized containment pouch on his utility belt. "We need immediate extraction." The AI's response was interrupted by the sound of the vault door being forced open. Joe spun around, pulse pistol raised, as multiple figures converged on the entrance, and found himself facing not one enemy, but two. From one side of the doorway entered 3 Krell hunters, their scaled bodies bearing the battle scars of fighting through the ship's defenses. Their leader, larger than the others, wore trophies from previous hunts attached to his armor, including what appeared to be human remains. His narrowed reptilian eyes fixed on the pouch containing the Codex crystal. From the opposite side appeared 4 black-armored syndicate operatives led by a pristinely uniformed commander whose cold efficiency was evident in every controlled movement. Unlike the Krell's obvious weapons, the syndicate forces carried more sophisticated equipment, neural disruptors, and containment devices designed for artifact retrieval rather than combat. For a brief moment, all parties froze, assessing one another in the blue glow of the vault. Joe, his back to the vault's center, kept his weapon moving between both groups. "Quest," the syndicate commander spoke first, his voice mechanically modulated by his helmet. "I am Commander Vex of the Obsidian Syndicate. That artifact you're carrying belongs to us now. Surrender it, and you may yet survive this encounter." The lead Krell hunter hissed a laugh bearing rows of serrated teeth. "The human is ours. The bounty specifies alive, but damaged is acceptable." He extended wickedly curved claws. "The artifact is secondary." Joe's mind raced, calculating odds and options. 3 Krell hunters with primitive but deadly weapons. 4 syndicate operatives with advanced technology. 1 exit. And 15 minutes, no, 14 now, until the entire ship exploded. "Gentlemen," he said with forced casualness, "I hate to interrupt this lovely gathering, but we're all standing in a ship that's about to self-destruct. Perhaps we could continue this discussion elsewhere." Commander Vex's helmet tilted slightly. "A convenient claim. Our scans show no reactor instability." "Your scans are about 500 years out of date," Joe retorted. "The preservation protocols are complete. The ship's final directive is to prevent unauthorized access by destroying itself." The Krell hunter snarled. "Lies. The human tries to escape." "Believe what you want," Joe shrugged, slowly shifting his position to keep both groups in view. "But I'm leaving. You're welcome to stay and test my theory." As if to emphasize his point, the vault lighting flickered, and a computerized voice announced throughout the ship, "Warning. Reactor containment failure imminent. 13 minutes to critical mass. All personnel evacuate immediately." The announcement gave Joe the moment of distraction he needed. In one fluid motion, he activated a flash grenade from his belt and tossed it into the center of the vault. The device detonated with a blinding pulse of light and disorienting sound, particularly effective against the sensitive optical systems of the syndicate helmets and the acute hearing of the Krell. In the ensuing chaos, Joe dove through the gap between the two disoriented groups, rolling to his feet in the corridor beyond. Behind him, recovery was swift. Krell hunters and syndicate operatives both giving chase, now firing indiscriminately at him and each other as the three-way conflict erupted into open violence. "Sophie," Joe gasped as he sprinted down the curved corridor, pulse pistol returning fire over his shoulder. "I need an evacuation route. Now." Chapter 6. Escape from the Ascendancy. The pristine white corridor became a chaos of weapons fire as Joe raced away from the vault. Behind him, the situation had devolved into a three-way battle, Krell hunters and syndicate operatives fighting each other as much as they pursued him. Energy weapons scorched the walls, and the guttural battle cries of the Krell echoed through the ship's core. "Sophie, route options," Joe demanded, ducking behind a structural support as a neural disruptor bolt sizzled past his head. "Analyzing ship schematics," the AI responded calmly. "The most direct route to your entry point is compromised by structural damage and hostile forces. Calculating alternatives." Joe didn't have time to wait. Checking the chronometer on his helmet display, 12 minutes until reactor failure, he made a split-second decision. The schematics he had studied showed an alternative path through the maintenance shafts that ran parallel to the main corridors. If he could reach the nearest access point, he might escape the immediate pursuit. Spotting a service panel 20 meters ahead, Joe sprinted forward, firing his pulse pistol to provide covering fire. A Krell hunter rounded the corner behind him, its massive frame filling the corridor as it charged with frightening speed. Joe dove for the panel, yanking it open and squeezing into the narrow maintenance shaft, beyond just as the Krell's claws slashed through the space he had occupied moments before. The shaft was claustrophobically tight, designed for the ship's service drones rather than human maintenance crews. Joe crawled rapidly through the dusty confines, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind him. After 30 meters, the shaft intersected with a vertical tube equipped with ladder rungs. "Sophie, I've entered the maintenance system," Joe reported, beginning to climb upward. "I need to reach the habitat rings and then find a path to the exterior." "Connection established with ship's schematic database," Sophie confirmed. "The maintenance network will allow you to bypass the central core security checkpoints. Proceed upward 2 levels, then take the eastern junction to reach the outer habitat ring." Joe climbed steadily, the physical exertion combining with adrenaline to keep him moving at maximum speed. The Genesis Codex crystal pulsed against his side, secured in its containment pouch, but somehow still connected to him. He could feel its warmth through the material, as if it were responding to his elevated heart rate. Reaching the designated level, Joe paused at the junction. "Sophie, status of hostiles." "Krell and syndicate forces are converging on the maintenance network access points. They have determined your escape route. Additionally, the ship's self-destruct sequence is causing progressive systems failure throughout all sections. Gravity fluctuations detected in the habitat rings." As if confirming this assessment, Joe felt a slight shift in the maintenance shaft's gravity, a momentary weightlessness followed by a return to normal. The ship's ancient systems were beginning to fail as power diverted to the final destructive sequence. Time remaining: 10 minutes, 17 seconds, until critical reactor failure. Joe continued through the eastern junction, moving as quickly as the confined space allowed. The maintenance tunnel widened slightly as it followed the curvature of the ship, eventually reaching another access panel. This should open into the outer habitat agricultural section, Joe muttered, examining the panel from inside. No sounds of pursuit could be heard from beyond. Carefully pushed the panel open, peering into the overgrown jungle of evolved earth plants he had traversed earlier. The scene had changed dramatically in the short time since his passage. Gravity fluctuations had caused sections of the massive trees to break free from their anchoring, floating eerily in pockets of zero-G while still partially connected to their roots. The effect was surreal. Fragments of forest suspended in midair, some rotating slowly as weak gravitational currents affected their mass. Joe eased himself out of the maintenance tunnel, immediately feeling the unstable gravity. His weight shifted unpredictably as he moved, making each step a calculated risk. The emergency lighting had taken on a red hue, bathing the wild vegetation in an apocalyptic glow. Warning, 9 minutes to reactor containment failure. All personnel evacuate immediately. The ship's announcement system continued its countdown, now with a detectable deterioration in audio quality as systems failed. Joe consulted his helmet display, plotting the fastest route back to his entry point. The path ahead was treacherous. Floating vegetation created a three-dimensional maze, and the predatory plants he had encountered earlier were now in a state of agitated response to the changing environment, their defensive mechanisms triggered by the stress. Sophie, update on Avrex's position. The Cavalier is maintaining position 3.4 kilometers from the Ascendancy's hull, concealed within the nebula's particulate concentration. Avrex reports increasing instability in the ship's external electromagnetic field. Approach and docking will become progressively more hazardous. Joe began navigating through the floating fragments of jungle, using his momentum to push between obstacles in sections of reduced gravity, then carefully controlling his landings where gravity momentarily intensified. The evolved plants reacted to his presence with even greater aggression than before, sensing the ship's imminent destruction and responding with a biological imperative to capture any potential resource. Vines whipped toward him with shocking speed, luminescent flowers released clouds of paralytic spores, and root systems attempted to entangle his legs as he passed. Joe used his sonic toolkit to disrupt the most aggressive specimens, but the device's battery was running low after multiple uses. Halfway through the habitat section, Joe encountered a new obstacle, a massive chasm where structural supports had failed, creating a 20-meter gap in the pathway. Below, the agricultural water reclamation system had ruptured, creating a lake of floating water globules in fluctuating gravity. Within these spheres, the predatory fish-like creatures he had encountered earlier darted back and forth, seemingly unaffected by the changing conditions. "Sophie, I need an alternative route," Joe reported, studying the impossible crossing. "Negative. All other paths are blocked by progressive structural collapse or hostile forces. The Krell hunters have reached the habitat ring and are approaching from the western quadrant." Joe assessed his options quickly. The nearest floating vegetation mass, a chunk of what had been the forest canopy, was drifting approximately 5 meters away. Beyond it, several other large fragments created a potential, if highly dangerous, crossing path. "Sometimes the direct approach is best," he muttered to himself, backing up several paces to get a running start. Joe sprinted toward the edge of the chasm and launched himself toward the floating canopy section. The reduced gravity extended his jump beyond normal human capability, but still left him short of his target. His hands grasped desperately at protruding branches, finding purchase on a thick vine. The plant immediately reacted to his touch, the vine coiling reflexively around his wrist. Joe didn't fight the response, instead using the plant's own reaction to pull himself onto the floating mass. Once secure, he carefully detached the vine before it could constrict further. From this temporary island, Joe surveyed the next jump. Timing would be critical. The floating fragments were moving in relation to each other as fluctuating gravity affected them differently based on mass. He would need to synchronize his jumps precisely. Warning, 7 minutes to reactor containment failure. The announcement was now accompanied by visible power fluctuations, the emergency lighting flickering erratically. Joe waited for the optimal moment, then jumped to the next fragment, and the next, creating a path across the chasm through sheer determination and calculated risk. The final gap proved the most challenging, a distance of nearly 8 meters to solid ground, with no intermediate points. As he prepared for the final leap, a bone-chilling screech echoed through the habitat. Joe looked back to see 3 Krell hunters entering from the far side, their reptilian forms moving with predatory grace despite the chaotic environment. The lead hunter, the trophy-adorned leader from the vault, spotted Joe and let out another hunting cry. There was no time for careful calculation now. Joe took 3 running steps on the floating vegetation mass and hurled himself across the final gap. For a heart-stopping moment, he flew through open space, the floating water globules and their predatory inhabitants passing beneath him. His trajectory fell short, hands grasping at the edge of the pathway beyond. Joe's fingers found minimal purchase on the crumbling edge, his body dangling precariously over the watery abyss below. With a supreme effort, he pulled himself upward, straining against gravity that chose that precise moment to intensify. Rolling onto solid ground, Joe glanced back to see the Krell hunters attempting their own crossing. The first leapt with impressive strength, but miscalculated the gravitational fluctuation. Its massive form plunged into one of the water globules, where the evolved predatory fish immediately converged in a frenzy. The water turned dark as the hunter thrashed in futile resistance. Joe didn't stay to witness the outcome. The path ahead led toward the outer hull and his entry point, now less than 5 minutes away at maximum speed. Sophie, instruct Avrex to approach extraction coordinates. We'll have a very narrow window. Message transmitted. Be advised, syndicate forces have deployed to multiple exterior positions around the Ascendancy. They appear to be establishing a blockade. Of course they are, Joe grimaced, pushing forward. The final stretch through the habitat ring showed increasing signs of the ship's imminent destruction. Structural beams had buckled, creating obstacles that required climbing or circumnavigation. Electrical systems sparked dangerously as power surged through failing conduits. The artificial sky of the habitat dome flickered between normal illumination and complete darkness, creating a stroboscopic effect that made navigation even more challenging. Warning: 5 minutes to reactor containment failure. Joe reached the habitat's outer boundary, where another security airlock separated the agricultural section from the ship's external compartments. Unlike his entry, this door was damaged, partially jammed in a half-open position by structural warping. The gap was narrow but passable. Joe removed his equipment harness to reduce his profile, carefully threading it and the precious Genesis Codex through first, then squeezing his body through the tight opening. Metal edges scraped against his EVA suit, tearing the outer layer but not compromising its integrity. Beyond lay a series of storage compartments and emergency equipment stations, the final buffer between the habitat and the outer hull. Joe retrieved his harness and continued forward, now running at full speed despite the increasingly unpredictable gravity. Sophie, distance to extraction point. 300 meters. Follow the emergency evacuation route markers. Be advised that hull integrity is compromised in multiple sections. Decompression hazards exist. As if summoned by this warning, the corridor ahead suddenly vented to space. A hull breach, causing an explosive decompression that sent equipment and debris flying toward the newly created opening. Emergency bulkheads began to close automatically, their ancient mechanisms struggling against the structural damage. Joe lunged forward, sliding beneath the descending bulkhead just before it sealed, cutting off the decompressing section behind him. His helmet sensors registered the momentary pressure drop before the section he now occupied stabilized. Warning: 3 minutes to reactor containment failure. The final stretch to his entry airlock was a nightmare of failing systems and structural damage. Twice more Joe had to navigate around hull breaches, and once he was forced to use his pulse pistol to clear a path through collapsed ceiling panels that blocked the corridor. Finally, the auxiliary maintenance airlock came into view, his original entry point and only hope for escape. Joe's relief was short-lived, however. Standing between him and the airlock were 4 syndicate operatives, their black armor making them appear as shadows in the emergency lighting. Quest, Commander Vex's modulated voice carried down the corridor. "I commend your persistence, but this ends now. The Genesis Codex, if you please. My men have orders to incapacitate, not kill. The same courtesy may not extend to you if you resist." Joe assessed the situation quickly. 4 operatives, all armed with neural disruptors, positioned in a semicircle blocking the airlock. No cover in the corridor between his position and theirs. 2 minutes remaining before the ship's reactor failed catastrophically. "You're right about one thing, Commander," Joe called back. "This does end now, but not the way you think." Without warning, Joe fired his pulse pistol, not at the syndicate operatives, but at the environmental control panel on the wall beside him. The shot penetrated the ancient system, causing a cascade of electrical failures that raced through the connected grid. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Emergency protocols activated, perceiving the damage as a life support failure. Overhead sprinkler systems designed to combat fires deployed throughout the section, releasing torrents of water that had been held in reserve tanks for centuries. In the fluctuating gravity environment, the water didn't fall, but instead formed large, undulating globules that filled the corridor, disrupting visibility and interfering with the syndicate operatives' targeting systems. Joe used this momentary advantage to sprint forward, diving into and through the floating water masses as he closed the distance to the airlock. The surprised operatives fired their neural disruptors, but the water absorbed and diffracted the energy pulses, rendering them largely ineffective. Commander Vex shouted orders, attempting to reorganize his forces as Joe broke through their perimeter. Reaching the airlock, Joe slammed his palm against the emergency override, initiating the cycling sequence. As the inner door began to open, he turned to face the approaching operatives, pulse pistol raised. "Warning, 1 minute to reactor containment failure." Commander Vex stepped forward, his posture radiating controlled fury even through the expressionless helmet. "You've lost, Quest. Even if you escape the ship, you can't escape the nebula. Our command vessel has established a blockade. The Genesis Codex will belong to the Syndicate." Joe backed into the airlock as the inner door fully opened. "You're welcome to try catching me, Commander, but you might want to focus on saving yourself first." The airlock began its cycling sequence, the inner door slowly closing. As it did, Joe activated the remaining electromagnetic disruptor from his toolkit, tossing it toward the Syndicate operatives. The device detonated with a pulse that temporarily disabled their armored systems, buying precious seconds as the airlock sealed. "Sophie, status of the Cavalier. Approaching extraction coordinates. Avrex has implemented full stealth protocols. Syndicate vessels are converging on the Ascendancy, but have not yet detected the Cavalier's approach vector." The airlock completed its cycle, the outer door opening to reveal the vastness of space beyond. The Erebus Nebula's swirling gases created a backdrop of purple and blue luminescence against which the Ascendancy's massive form was silhouetted, a dying Leviathan in its final moments. Joe secured his helmet seals and activated his EVA suit's propulsion system. With a controlled burst, he launched himself away from the airlock and into open space, the Genesis Codex crystal secure against his side. "Warning, 30 seconds to reactor containment failure." As Joe maneuvered away from the Ascendancy, he could see multiple Syndicate vessels maintaining position around the massive ship, their sleek black forms like predatory fish circling wounded prey. Krell hunting ships, more organic in their design, hovered at a greater distance, perhaps sensing the imminent destruction. "Sophie, where's the Cavalier? I don't have visual contact." Intersection course plotted. Avrex is approaching from your 4 o'clock position, using the Ascendancy's radiator array as visual cover. Joe oriented himself accordingly, using short bursts from his suit's thrusters to adjust his trajectory. The Genesis Codex crystal pulsed against him, its rhythm now perfectly synchronized with his heartbeat, as if they had indeed formed some kind of symbiotic bond. "Warning, 10 seconds to reactor containment failure." In the distance, a familiar shape emerged from behind the massive radiator panels of the Ascendancy. The Cavalier, its mismatched hull plates barely visible against the nebula's gases. Avrex had navigated with precision, bringing the ship to the exact coordinates while avoiding detection by the larger syndicate vessels. 5-4-3. Joe fired his thrusters at maximum output, propelling himself toward the approaching Cavalier as its airlock extended to receive him. 2-1. The Ascendancy's final moment began with an eerie silence. Points of brilliant light emerged from within the ship as internal systems reached critical failure. The massive structure seemed to inhale, contracting slightly as energy built within its core. Then came the explosion, a blossoming sphere of incandescent energy that expanded outward from the ship's center, consuming the ancient vessel from within. The habitat rings shattered, releasing the evolved ecosystem into the vacuum of space in a tragic display of dissipating atmosphere and flash-frozen life forms. Joe reached the Cavalier's extended airlock just as the shockwave from the explosion began to propagate outward. Avrex, monitoring from the cockpit, immediately initiated emergency thrust, pulling away from the expanding devastation. The shockwave caught them nonetheless, sending the Cavalier tumbling through the nebula in an uncontrolled spiral. Inside the airlock, Joe was thrown against the bulkhead with bone-jarring force, the artificial gravity failing momentarily under the strain. "Sophie, status," he called out as the ship systems fluctuated around him. "Primary systems experiencing cascading failures," the AI reported, her voice distorted by power fluctuations. "Avrex is attempting to stabilize our trajectory. Hyperdrive offline. Hull integrity at 76% and declining." Joe made his way to the cockpit, bracing against walls as the ship continued to tumble. Avrex sat at the controls, all four arms working independently to restore crucial systems. The cerulean's gill slits flared with exertion, the silver flecks in his eyes intensified by stress. "Quest," Avrex acknowledged without looking up. "You have an infuriating talent for cutting things close." "Part of my charm," Joe replied, strapping into the co-pilot's seat. "Status of the syndicate vessels." The nearest three were caught in the primary explosion. The command vessel was at sufficient distance to avoid destruction, but has sustained significant damage. Avrex's upper right hand gestured to a sensor display. The Krell hunting ships were more cautious. They survived largely intact and are regrouping. Joe nodded, reaching for the navigation controls. "We need to use the nebula's particulate density for cover while we make repairs. Sophie, plot a course deeper into the Erebus cloud formations." "Course plotted," the AI confirmed. "However, I must note that visibility will be reduced to near zero in those regions. Navigation will be primarily instrumental." "Perfect," Joe grinned. "The bigger ships won't risk it." As the Cavalier limped deeper into the nebula's concealing gases, Joe finally had a moment to catch his breath. He removed the containment pouch from his belt, carefully extracting the Genesis Codex crystal. In the dim light of the cockpit, its blue luminescence was even more pronounced, pulsing in perfect synchronization with his heartbeat. Avrex's four eyes widened at the sight. "Is that?" "The Genesis Codex," Joe confirmed, holding the crystal carefully. "Earth's entire biological heritage, preserved in quantum storage." The cerulean stared in undisguised awe. All this time, the legends were true. "More than true," Joe murmured, watching patterns shift within the crystal's translucent structure. "The custodian, the AI protecting the codex, said it contains not just genetic sequences, but complete ecosystem models, terraforming protocols, implementation methodologies, everything needed to restore what Earth lost." Avrex's gill slits fluttered with emotion. "A treasure beyond price." "And beyond danger," Joe added grimly. "The syndicate won't stop hunting us now, neither will the Krell. We need to find somewhere safe while we decide what to do with it." The ship shuddered as it penetrated deeper into the nebula, external sensors registering the increasing particulate density. Within minutes, the viewport showed nothing but swirling purple-blue gases, occasionally illuminated by energy discharges within the cloud formations. "I've stabilized the primary systems," Avrex reported after several minutes of silent work. "We have sublight engines at 62% capacity, life support fully functional, and defensive systems online. The hyperdrive, however, requires substantial repairs." Joe nodded, still studying the crystal in his hand. How long? With the right parts, 3 days. With what we have aboard, perhaps a week, and even then we would be limited to short jumps. A week in the nebula, Joe mused. Not ideal, but the particulate density should confuse pursuit enough to give us that time. Avrex turned all four eyes toward Joe. What will you do with it? The Codex. It was the question Joe had been asking himself since touching the crystal in the vault. The Genesis Codex represented power beyond measure, the ability to reshape ecosystems, to bring extinct species back from oblivion, to potentially transform uninhabitable worlds into mirrors of Earth's lost splendor. In the hands of the syndicate, it would become a proprietary technology, accessible only to the wealthiest clients, its potential squandered for profit. Military applications would inevitably follow, with genetic warfare becoming a terrifying new frontier. But used properly, with wisdom and restraint, the Codex could heal damaged worlds across the galaxy, could restore countless species lost to extinction, could reconnect humanity with its biological heritage in ways that transcended simple archaeology. The right thing, Joe answered finally, returning the crystal to its containment pouch. We find someone who will use it for its intended purpose, to preserve and restore, not to exploit or weaponize. Avrex's gill slits relaxed slightly, a sign of approval in cerulean body language. I may know someone. Dr. Eli Novak, a xenobiologist with the Galactic Preservation Foundation. He has dedicated his life to studying and preserving endangered species across known space. Joe nodded slowly. Can he be trusted? With something of this importance? Yes. His ethics are uncompromising, sometimes to his professional detriment. The Foundation has outposts on multiple worlds beyond syndicate influence. Then that's our heading, once the hyperdrive is repaired. Joe leaned back in his chair, fatigue finally catching up with him. The events aboard the Ascendancy, the evolved jungle, the Sentinels, the Genesis Codex itself, all seemed dreamlike now, fading into the surreal quality of memory. Yet the crystal at his side pulsed with tangible reality, a connection to Earth's lost wonders that no one had experienced for centuries. Whatever came next, pursuit, danger, difficult choices, Joe knew that he had fulfilled the most fundamental aspect of his self-appointed mission. He had recovered a piece of humanity's past that might yet shape its future. As the Cavalier drifted through the nebula's concealing embrace, Joe Quest, treasure hunter and fugitive, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Genesis Codex had been found. Earth's legacy would live on. The hunt, however, was far from over. Chapter 7, Legacy of the Ascendancy. 3 months passed like the turning pages of an ancient book, each day bringing new challenges, new discoveries, and new understanding of the treasure Joe Quest had recovered from the Ascendancy. Cavalier had escaped the Erebus Nebula after 9 tense days of repairs and evasion. Avrex's mechanical brilliance, combined with Joe's knack for improvisation, had restored the hyperdrive to functional status, if not peak performance. They had emerged from the nebula's concealing gases only to face immediate pursuit, a pattern that would continue across multiple star systems, as both the Obsidian Syndicate and the Krell Hunting Guild deployed significant resources to track them. Yet they had persevered, staying one jump ahead of their pursuers through a combination of unconventional navigation routes, temporary safe harbors arranged through Joe's extensive network of contacts, and the occasional daring escape when corner became too tight. Now, 3 months after the destruction of the Ascendancy, Joe stood on the observation deck of Terra Nova Station, a research facility orbiting a terraforming project on the outskirts of settled space. Through the reinforced viewport, he watched as the planet below underwent its transformation, barren red deserts gradually yielding to patches of green and blue as the terraforming process took hold. But what made this particular project unique was visible in the research biodomes attached to the station's outer ring. There, protected in carefully controlled environments, species that had not existed for over 500 years were being reborn. Plants, insects, and small animals whose genetic sequences had been extracted from the Genesis Codex. Remarkable progress, isn't it? Came a voice from behind him. Joe turned to see Dr. Eli Novak approaching, the xenobiologist's tall, slender frame silhouetted against the corridor lighting. Despite being in his 60s, Novak moved with the energy of a much younger man, his enthusiasm for his work evident in every gesture. The Joshua trees are thriving, Novak continued, joining Joe at the viewport, and the pollinator insects have already established sustainable breeding populations. We're ready to introduce the first vertebrate species next week, California quail, I believe you called them. Joe nodded, a small smile playing across his features. My mother used to tell me stories about them, said they ran in little groups with their head plumes bobbing like exclamation marks. Your ancestral knowledge has been invaluable, Novak acknowledged. The Codex contains the raw data, but your cultural memory, the human context for these species, adds a dimension that pure science could never recover. From the beginning, this had been their arrangement. Joe had provided the Genesis Codex to the Galactic Preservation Foundation, with Dr. Novak as its primary custodian. In return, the Foundation had established the Ascendancy Initiative, a comprehensive program dedicated to studying, preserving, and eventually reintroducing Earth's lost species to suitable environments. The unique bond between Joe and the Codex crystal proved essential to this work. As the custodian AI had explained, the crystal had synchronized with his genetic signature, responding to his conscious direction when accessing specific data. This meant Joe remained a necessary part of the research team, his presence required for full access to the Codex's vast database. It was an arrangement that suited Joe well. After years of hunting treasures that ultimately ended up in private collections or corporate vaults, witnessing the direct positive impact of his greatest find provided a satisfaction he had never anticipated. The botanical team has requested your assistance this afternoon, Novak mentioned. They're attempting to access information on mycorrhizal networks, the fungal systems that connected forest trees on Earth. Apparently, the terraforming process is struggling without these networks properly established. I'll head down after my meeting with Avrex, Joe agreed. He's due back from Cerulii Prime today. Novak's expression brightened. Ah, yes. How did his negotiation with the syndicate proceed? Successfully, according to his last transmission. Joe smiled. The Foundation's legal team was persuasive. The syndicate has relinquished their claim to his ancestral waters in exchange for non-disclosure agreements regarding certain Genesis Codex applications. The truth was somewhat more complicated. The Foundation, backed by several influential member worlds, had leveraged significant political pressure against the syndicate, while simultaneously offering limited, non-critical genetic data for specific agricultural applications. The compromise had secured not only Avrex's ancestral waters, but also a tentative truce. The syndicate had officially suspended their pursuit of Joe and the Codex, though neither Joe nor Novak fully trusted this agreement to hold indefinitely. Excellent news, Novak nodded. His expertise will be valuable as we prepare for the next phase. The aquatic biodomes are nearly ready for population. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Joe's communicator. The message was brief but clear. Cavalier docking, meeting required, news from Sector 7A. Duty calls, Joe told Novak, already moving toward the docking ring. Avrex is back, and apparently with information. Keep me informed, the scientist called after him, particularly if it affects our security protocols. Joe made his way through the station's circular corridors, nodding to researchers and technicians as he passed. Many greeted him by name, a strange experience for someone who had spent years avoiding recognition. Here, among the Foundation's personnel, he was not Joe Quest, the fugitive treasure hunter, but Joseph Quest, biological heritage consultant, a title Novak had insisted upon for official documentation. The Cavalier was just completing its docking procedure when Joe arrived at the bay. The ship looked considerably improved from its condition 3 months ago. With the Foundation's resources at their disposal, Joe and Avrex had finally been able to properly repair and upgrade the vessel, though Joe had insisted on keeping the mismatched hull plates as a matter of sentimental attachment. The airlock cycled open, and Avrex emerged, his blue-grey skin showing the healthier luster that had returned since their arrival at Terra Nova. All 4 of his eyes brightened upon seeing Joe. Quest, the Cerulean greeted him, extending his lower right hand in the human gesture of handshaking they had established. The waters are ours again. My family performs the ancestral rites of return as we speak. Joe clasped the offered hand firmly. Congratulations, my friend. That's excellent news. Indeed, Avrex's gill slits fluttered with evident satisfaction. But there is more to discuss, privately. They made their way to Joe's quarters, a modest but comfortable suite assigned to him by the Foundation. Once inside, with the door secured, Avrex's demeanor shifted to one of greater seriousness. While on Cerulii Prime, I encountered a former associate with connections to certain information networks. He began, all four arms moving in the complex gestural language that Ceruleans used to convey nuance. Commander Vex has been removed from his position within the syndicate. Joe raised an eyebrow. Removed how? Officially, reassigned to administrative duties. Unofficially, he has disappeared with a small contingent of loyal operatives and a modified corvette-class vessel. Avrex's upper left hand produced a data chip. His last known coordinates place him near the Veil Nebula, where rumors speak of another generation ship. Joe felt a familiar tension return to his shoulders, the instinctive alertness of the hunted. He's looking for another codex. So it would appear, Avrex confirmed. The syndicate has officially disavowed his actions as unauthorized, but my sources suggest certain factions within their hierarchy are providing covert support. And the Krell. 3 hunting parties remain active with bounties specifically naming you. Their guild leaders have doubled the reward since our last encounter. Avrex's gill slits narrowed in what Joe had learned was his species' expression of grim humor. You should be flattered. Joe paced the small room, considering the implications. Novak needs to be informed. We may need to relocate the project. Perhaps, Avrex acknowledged. Though Terra Nova's remote position and the Foundation's defensive capabilities provide significant protection. Joe nodded absently, his thoughts already racing ahead. Another generation ship, another potential repository of Earth's legacy, if Vex found it first. The Genesis Codex crystal, which Joe kept with him at all times in a specialized containment unit, seemed to pulse more strongly against his side, as if sensing his agitation. Over the months, the connection between Joe and the crystal had deepened in ways that even Novak scientists couldn't fully explain. It responded to his emotional states, sometimes offering relevant data without explicit requests, as if it had developed a form of intuition about his needs. We need to find this ship before Vex does, Joe decided, turning back to Avrex. The Cavalier is fully repaired, and we have the advantage of actually understanding what we're looking for. Avrex studied him with all 4 eyes. The Foundation will not approve of you leaving Terra Nova. Your connection to the Codex makes you essential to their work. I'm not suggesting abandoning the project, Joe clarified, but we can't risk another Codex falling into Vex's hands. The agreement with the Syndicate is fragile at best. If they acquire their own codex, nothing would stop them from coming after ours as well, to eliminate the competition. The Cerulean was silent for a moment, his gill slits pulsing as he considered Joe's words. Finally, he spoke. The Cavalier is ready. My debt to you is cleared, yet I find myself curious about this other ship. Perhaps it is time for another hunt. Joe smiled, feeling the familiar excitement of the chase beginning to build. I'll speak with Novak. We'll need to establish a secure communication protocol to continue assisting the Ascendancy initiative remotely. And if he refuses? Joe's smile turned slightly mischievous. Then we'll need to be very apologetic when we return with the second codex. Later that evening, as Terra Nova's artificial day cycle dimmed toward night, Joe stood again at the observation viewport, watching the partially terraformed planet below. Unexpectedly, Dr. Novak joined him, the older man's reflection appearing in the transparent aluminum beside Joe's own. Avrex told me about Commander Vex, Novak began without preamble, and about the possibility of another generation ship. Joe turned to face him. Then you understand why we need to go. I understand why you want to go, Novak corrected gently. The question is whether it serves the greater purpose we've established here. If Vex finds another codex, the risk is significant, Novak acknowledged, but so is the risk of losing you and the connection you've established with our codex. The work here is just beginning, Joe. Earth's legacy is being reborn because of what you brought us. Joe gestured toward the planet below. And that work will continue. The research team has accessed enough data to proceed with the current phases. I've prepared detailed instructions for extracting the most critical information in my absence. But the connection remains, Joe assured him, tapping the containment unit at his side. Distance doesn't seem to affect it. During Avrex's journey to Cerulii Prime, I was still able to access the Codex data when needed. We've tested the range extensively. Novak sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly in resignation. You've already decided, haven't you? The moment I heard about Vex, Joe admitted. It's who I am, Eli. I find things, especially things that others are hunting. And in this case, we can't afford to let the wrong people find it first. The scientist studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The Foundation will continue the work here. We'll establish the secure communication protocols you requested. His expression grew more serious. But Joe, be careful. What we're doing here matters, not just scientifically, but for humanity's connection to its past. You've become more than a treasure hunter in these months. Joe looked out at the terraforming planet again, where patches of green were spreading across the once barren surface. In those growing ecosystems, species that had been extinct for centuries were taking root, beginning again, their biological clocks reset after an interruption of half a millennium. I know, he said quietly. That's why I have to go. What we've started here needs to be protected. 2 days later, the Cavalier departed Terra Nova Station, its systems fully upgraded and its supplies restocked for an extended journey. The Foundation had provided enhanced stealth technology and the latest sensor arrays, significantly improving the ship's capabilities for both evasion and detection. As they cleared the station's traffic control zone, Avrex set course for the coordinates they had extracted from the intelligence data, the region of the Veil Nebula where Commander Vex was reportedly searching. Course laid in, the Cerulean reported from the pilot's seat, all 4 hands moving with practiced efficiency across the controls. Estimated arrival at the Veil Nebula, 6 days at standard hyperspace velocity. Let's push it a little harder, Joe suggested, settling into the co-pilot's chair. Vex has a head start. Sophie's avatar materialized on the dashboard, her geometric patterns flowing more smoothly than before thanks to upgraded holographic projectors. Hyperdrive calibrated for 115% standard output. Sustainability at this level projected at 97.3% for the duration of our journey. Joe nodded, watching the stars elongate around them as the Cavalier entered hyperspace. The Genesis Codex crystal pulsed against his side, its rhythm steady and reassuring. Whatever lay ahead, whether another treasure beyond price or dangers yet unknown, he was ready. The hunt continued. As the Cavalier carried him toward new horizons and fresh adventures, one thing remained certain. The treasures worth finding were not simply those that glittered with value, but those that connected us to who we once were and what we might become again. For in the end, the greatest discovery is not the artifact itself, but the understanding of why it matters and the wisdom to use that knowledge well.